As I walked into the quarterly executive meeting, my husband's face went from smug to shocked in seconds. 5 years ago, he left me for his assistant, saying I'd never understand the business world. Today, as the new owner of Meridian Enterprises, I was about to announce his termination, and the secretary who handed me the documents was his girlfriend who had replaced me in his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The executive boardroom of Meridian Enterprises gleamed under soft recessed lighting, the polished mahogany, table reflecting the faces of 16 anxious executives. I adjusted my tailored navy suit, selected carefully for this moment, and felt the weight of the leather portfolio in my hands. Inside contained termination papers for 7 executives, including one name that had once been on my marriage certificate. Ms. Vivian Chen, representing Horizon Capital Partners, announced Diane, the stern-faced corporate secretary who had been instrumental in making this day possible. The room fell silent. Most had expected another faceless investor to address them, not me. I could feel the collective shift in energy as I moved toward the head of the table, the position my ex-husband Alexander Reed had occupied for the past 8 years. Alexander sat halfway down the table, his signature platinum cufflinks catching the light as he leaned forward. His expression morphed from mild curiosity to recognition, then to barely concealed panic. Beside him, Natalie Barnes, once his executive assistant, now his fiancée, looked between us in confusion, still not comprehending the situation. "Thank you all for gathering today," I began, my voice steady and clear, a voice I had practiced for months in anticipation of this moment. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Horizon Capital Partners has completed its acquisition of Meridian Enterprises. The tension was palpable. These executives had been expecting a standard post-acquisition platitude session, promises of minimal disruption, the usual corporate reassurances. What they didn't know was that Horizon Capital Partners was my company, created from nothing. In the 5 years since Alexander had left our marriage and pushed me out of the company we had built together. "Some of you may remember me," I continued, allowing my gaze to sweep the room before settling on Alexander. "For those who don't, I co-founded Meridian with Alexander Reed 12 years ago." Alexander's knuckles whitened around his Mont Blanc pen. The memory of his words echoed between us across the polished table. "You're a liability to this company, Vivian. You always have been. The business world isn't for everyone." I opened my portfolio, the familiar action grounding me in the eye, present. Meridian has drifted from its founding principles over the past 5 years. Quarterly reports show declining innovation, employee satisfaction at an all-time low, and customer retention dropping by 23% annually. Several executives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to Alexander, whose face had taken on a reddish hue. He had built his leadership on creating the appearance of success while the foundation crumbled, a strategy I had warned him about years ago. "Immediate restructuring is necessary," I said, nodding to Diane, who began distributing sealed envelopes. 7 leadership positions are being eliminated effective immediately. The room erupted in murmurs as executives reached for the envelopes. With trembling hands, some would find standard meeting agendas, 7 would find termination agreements. Alexander didn't move to touch his envelope, already understanding its contents. Natalie reached for hers with manicured fingers, the 4-carat diamond on her left hand, so similar to the one Alexander had once given me, catching the light. "This is absurd," Alexander finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled rage. "You can't just walk in here and—" "The board unanimously approved the acquisition and restructuring plan this morning," I interrupted smoothly. "Your performance reviews and financial discrepancies over the past 3 years provided all the evidence needed. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being in this position. The night Alexander told me he was leaving, both our marriage And my position at Meridian? I had collapsed on our bedroom floor, sobbing as he methodically packed his clothes into a suitcase. "You've always been too emotional for business, Viv," he had said, not even looking at me as he selected which ties to take. "Natalie understands what it takes to succeed in this world. You never will." That night had broken me, but as I stood, now at the head of the boardroom table, I recognized it had also rebuilt me into someone stronger, more strategic, and far more dangerous than the woman Alexander had dismissed. That night had broken me. But as I stood now at the head of the boardroom table, I recognized it had also rebuilt me into someone stronger, more strategic, and far more dangerous than the woman Alexander had dismissed. "Those affected will be escorted to collect personal belongings," I continued, gesturing toward the door where security personnel now stood. "Severance details are outlined in your packets, contingent upon the standard non-disclosure agreements." Alexander pushed back, his chair abruptly, standing to his full height. "This is personal, not business," he hissed, loud enough for nearby executives to hear. "You've orchestrated this whole thing for revenge." I met his gaze steadily, feeling nothing but a cool detachment where pain had once lived. "On the contrary, Alexander, the 14 board members who voted unanimously this morning have never met me personally. They voted based on performance data and my proposed recovery strategy." I allowed a small smile. "Though I won't deny this particular aspect of the restructuring brings additional satisfaction." Natalie had finally opened her envelope, her face draining of color as she read its contents. Unlike Alexander, she hadn't been terminated, a deliberate choice on my part. Her skills had never been the issue, only her ethics. "Ms. Barnes will be reassigned to the Denver office, effective next week," I announced, watching as she processed this information. The Denver office was struggling but salvageable, and 1,500 miles away from headquarters. The memory of discovering their affair surfaced briefly, walking into Alexander's office after hours to surprise him with dinner, only to find him with Natalie on the desk I had helped select when we founded the company. The humiliation had been excruciating, compounded when he called me the next day to discuss the situation and informed me my services were no longer required at Meridian. "You're a brilliant woman, Viv," he had said with practiced sympathy. "But business requires a certain ruthlessness you've never had." As security approached Alexander, whose face now fluctuated between rage and disbelief, I felt a strange sense of calm. The ruthlessness he claimed I lacked had been cultivated in the barren aftermath he had created. "This meeting will reconvene at 3 o'clock, I said to the remaining executives, many of whom were studiously avoiding eye contact with either me or Alexander. "We'll discuss the transition plan and new direction for Meridian. Those remaining should consider this an opportunity to realign with the company's original vision." Alexander was being escorted toward the door, his normally confident stride faltering. He paused as he passed me. "You won't be able to run this company," he said, quietly, a final attempt to shake my confidence. "You'll destroy everything I've built." I leaned closer, my voice for his ears only. "I'm not going to run your company, Alexander. I'm going to rebuild mine." As the door closed behind him, I took the seat at the head of the table. Not Alexander's seat, but the one that had always been intended for a visionary leader. The remaining executives watched me with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and dawning respect. The journey that had led me from sobbing on my bedroom floor to commandeering this boardroom had been anything but easy. After Alexander had pushed me out of Meridian, I'd found myself starting over at 40, with a broken heart and a shattered professional identity. But that morning in the boardroom was just the beginning. Alexander didn't yet know what awaited him outside. Reporters tipped off about financial irregularities at Meridian, his carefully cultivated industry reputation already unraveling as the business press caught wind of the dramatic leadership change. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Reed Chen residence sat perched on a hillside overlooking the Seattle skyline, its contemporary glass and stone facade a testament to the success of Meridian Enterprises. The house had been featured in Architectural Digest just months earlier. Tech industry power couple creates modern marvel. A glossy 12-page spread showcasing the custom features Vivian and Alexander had meticulously selected together. The night that Alexander ended their marriage, rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their master bedroom, the Seattle skyline blurred behind sheets of water. The weather seemed determined to match Vivian's internal landscape, turbulent, obscured, drowning. "I don't understand," Vivian had repeated, watching Alexander methodically pack his belongings into a monogrammed leather suitcase, a 5th anniversary gift she had given him. "We were just discussing the Thompson acquisition yesterday. We were planning that trip to Kyoto next month." Alexander barely looked up as he folded his dress shirts with practiced precision. "I've been meaning to have this conversation for months, Viv. There's never a good time." The bedroom that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed cavernous and cold. Minimalist furniture that had appeared elegant in daylight now felt sterile under the recessed lighting. The king-sized bed with its crisp white linens, untouched that evening, looked like a vast empty field between them. "Is this about the disagreement at the board meeting?" Vivian asked, her mind racing to make sense of this sudden upheaval. "I know we have different approaches to the expansion, but we've always worked through strategic differences." Alexander sighed, the sound heavy with practiced patience. He finally turned to face her, his expression a careful mask of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This isn't about any single disagreement, Vivian. It's about fundamental incompatibility. Both, personally and professionally." He closed the suitcase with a definitive click. "I need a partner who understands what it takes to succeed at this level. Someone who can make the tough calls without getting emotional." The carefully controlled words landed like precise incisions. This wasn't an impulsive decision. This was a planned extraction, surgical and cold. "You're talking about Natalie," Vivian said, the realization crystallizing with nauseating clarity. The lingering meetings, the changed passwords, the subtle exclusions from key discussions over the past months, all suddenly making a terrible kind of sense. Alexander didn't deny it. "Natalie understands my vision for Meridian. She supports my decisions instead of constantly challenging them." "That's my job as your co-founder and your wife," Vivian countered, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain composure. "To challenge you when you're making decisions that could harm the company. The aggressive acquisition strategy you're pushing, it's creating unsustainable debt. You know I'm right about this." A flash of irritation crossed Alexander's face, breaking through his composed facade. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're too cautious, too concerned with employee satisfaction and sustainability metrics when we need to be focused on growth at all costs." He picked up his suitcase, glancing around the room one final time. "I've already spoken with the board. We've agreed it's best if you step back from day-to-day operations at Meridian." The room seemed to tilt around Vivian. "You've spoken with the board? Without me? I'm the co-founder." "With a minority stake after the last funding round, Alexander. Kurt, a decision you were against, if you recall. A decision that gave us the capital to become what we are today." He reached for the door handle. "You'll be well compensated, of course. The terms are fair." "Fair?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Alexander paused in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the hallway light. For a moment, Vivian thought. She saw a flicker of genuine regret cross his face. "You're a brilliant woman, Viv, but business requires a certain ruthlessness you've never had." Then he was gone, footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving Vivian standing in the center of their meticulously designed bedroom, the sound of rain against glass, the only response to her unraveling world. She didn't move for hours, standing, frozen as if motion might confirm that this new reality was permanent. Outside, The Seattle skyline emerged gradually as the storm cleared, lights twinkling against the night sky. The city looked the same, impossibly unchanged, while everything inside had been destroyed. The home that had been featured in magazines now felt like an elaborate stage set. Beautiful, but hollow, designed for a life that no longer existed. Every carefully selected piece of furniture, every thoughtfully chosen artwork suddenly seemed to belong to different people, characters in a story that had unexpectedly ended. The walk-in closet Alexander had just emptied had been designed with dual sides, his and hers, with a center island of drawers they shared. Now his absence created a physical void that echoed the emotional one tearing through her chest. His cologne lingered in the air, the scent both comforting and nauseating in its familiarity. The night stretched endlessly as Vivian finally moved from standing to sitting on the edge of the bed, her body folding in on itself as the magnitude of the loss engulfed her. Not just her marriage, but her company, her professional identity and life's work, all excised in one clinical conversation. By morning, when the first rays of sunlight broke through the automated blinds, programmed by Alexander to rise at precisely 6:15 a.m., Vivian had not slept. Her eyes, swollen from crying, looked out at the city spread below. A city where somewhere Alexander and Natalie were beginning their new life amid the ruins of hers. The house, designed to showcase their success, now felt like a mausoleum for her dreams. Every corner held memories of plans made, celebrations shared, a future mapped out in confident detail. The kitchen where they'd hosted dinner parties for investors. The dining room where they'd signed their first major client contract, too excited to wait until they reached the office. The terrace where they'd toasted each funding round, each milestone. Vivian moved through these spaces like a ghost, touching surfaces, remembering. The pain was physical, a constrictive pressure in her chest, a hollowness in her stomach, a persistent trembling in her hands that wouldn't subside no matter how tightly she clasped them. When her phone rang at precisely 9 a.m., Alexander's name appearing on the screen, Vivian almost didn't answer. But some remaining professional instinct, some deeply ingrained sense of responsibility to the company they'd built, compelled her to accept the call. "I'm glad you picked up," Alexander said, his voice brisk, already shifted into full business mode. "I've scheduled a meeting with HR at 11 noon to discuss your transition package. It would be best if you came to the office one last time to sign the paperwork." Vivian listened, her free hand gripping the kitchen counter so hard her knuckles whitened. Through the phone, she could hear the familiar sounds of Meridian's headquarters, gentle. Conversation, the espresso machine in the break room, phones ringing, life continuing as normal in the company she had helped create. "Vivian? Are you there?" Alexander's impatience leaked through. "Yes," she managed, the single word an accomplishment against the tightness in her throat. "Good. 11 a.m. then. Natalie, we'll send you the details of what to bring. We'll need your company laptop and access cards." The casual mention of Natalie, now apparently handling the logistics of Vivian's professional execution, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. The woman who had replaced her in Alexander's bed was now facilitating her removal from the company she had co-founded. "I'll be there," Vivian said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. After hanging up, she moved to the master bathroom, a sanctuary of marble and glass she had designed herself. The woman in the mirror was unrecognizable, pale, hollow-eyed, diminished. For a moment, Vivian simply stared at this stranger, this shell of the confident entrepreneur who had graced magazine covers alongside Alexander as tech's most dynamic power couple. Then, with hands that trembled slightly less than before, she reached for her makeup bag. If she was to be executed professionally, she would not go without dignity. She would face Alexander, Natalie, and the HR team as Vivian Chen, co-founder of Meridian Enterprises, not as the shattered woman who had stood immobile in her bedroom all night. Layer by layer, she rebuilt her exterior. Foundation, concealer, subtle contour, a sweep of blush to bring life back to her pallor. The familiar ritual was anchoring, each product a small step toward reclaiming some semblance of control. By the time she selected a crisp white shirt and charcoal pencil skirt from her closet, something had shifted imperceptibly within her. The pain remained, raw and overwhelming, but alongside it, something else had begun to take root. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps its prerequisite, a determination to survive this moment, and the next, and the one after that. The house, with its soaring ceilings and perfect views, had been designed to impress, to announce to the world that Vivian Chen and Alexander Reed had arrived. Now, as Vivian gathered her car keys and professional portfolio, she recognized it for what it truly was, a beautiful, empty shell that had never been a home. As she stepped through the front door toward her waiting car, Vivian didn't know yet what would rise from the ashes of this devastation. She couldn't imagine that 5 years later she would stand at the head of a boardroom table, watching Alexander's face contort with shock as she reclaimed what he had taken. She knew only that she had to survive this day, and she would, with her head held high and her wounds carefully concealed behind a mask of professional composure. The Seattle skyline gleamed in the morning sunlight as she drove toward Meridian headquarters one last time, unaware that this ending was actually the first step in a remarkable beginning. The Meridian Enterprises headquarters occupied the top 8 floors of a gleaming downtown Seattle skyscraper. Vivian remembered every detail of its construction, the heated debates over the floor plan design, the careful selection of the building location, even the custom-made reception desk that greeted visitors with its sleek curves of sustainable bamboo. As Vivian stepped off the elevator at precisely 10:45 that morning, she felt like a ghost in her own creation. Employees glanced up as she passed, their expressions shifting quickly from recognition to discomfort before they looked away. News traveled fast in corporate environments, and it was clear from their averted eyes that everyone already knew. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," said Michael, the security guard who had worked at Meridian since its early days. His usual warm smile was replaced with a look of awkward sympathy. "It's good to see you." Vivian nodded, unable to trust her voice. She had known these halls would feel different today, but she hadn't anticipated the acute sense of alienation, of suddenly being an outsider in the very space she had helped design. The receptionist, a recent hire who Vivian didn't recognize, looked up with a professionally neutral expression. "Ms. Chen, Human Resources is expecting you. 5th floor, conference room C. Not the executive floor, not Alexander's office or the main boardroom. Conference room C, the small windowless space typically used for entry-level interviews and vendor meetings." The message was clear. This was to be as quick and clinical as possible. "Thank you," Vivian replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The elevator ride to the 5th floor felt interminable. 2 junior developers joined her, their animated conversation about code dropping into uncomfortable silence when they recognized, Vivian kept her eyes fixed on the changing floor numbers, her reflection in the polished elevator doors showing a woman composed and professional, the careful mask betraying none of the turmoil beneath. Conference room C was exactly as she remembered, utilitarian and bland, with motivational posters that had been selected by a consultant years ago. Waiting inside were Stephanie Winters from Human Resources, a man Vivian didn't recognize who was clearly an attorney, and Natalie Barnes. Natalie sat with perfect posture in a dress Vivian recognized from the company's last holiday party. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Vivian had been home hosting executives and their spouses, Natalie had already been more than Alexander's assistant. "Vivian, thank you for coming in," Stephanie began, her professional tone barely concealing her discomfort. "This is Marcus Bennett from Legal." Vivian took the seat across from them, placing her portfolio carefully on the table. "Where's Alexander?" Mr. Reed thought it would be best if he wasn't present for this discussion. Natalie answered smoothly. He wanted to ensure the transition was handled with appropriate sensitivity. The audacity of his absence, of sending his mistress instead, struck Vivian with such force that she nearly laughed. This, then, was the final indignity, being processed out of her own company by the woman who had replaced her, while Alexander couldn't even face her. "I see," Vivian said, the two simple words containing volumes. Marcus Bennett cleared his throat, sliding a thick document across the table. "We've prepared a comprehensive severance package that I believe you'll find quite generous." Vivian didn't reach for it immediately. "Before we begin, I'd like to understand exactly what the board has been told about my departure." Stephanie and Marcus exchanged glances. Natalie's expression remained perfectly controlled. "The official communication states that you're stepping back to pursue other interests," Stephanie offered. "Alexander was quite insistent that your contribution to Meridian be acknowledged appropriately." "How thoughtful of him," Vivian said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. She finally reached for the document, opening it to scan the first page. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essence was clear. In exchange for her shares being bought at a predetermined rate and a substantial severance package, she would relinquish all claims to Meridian Enterprises and sign a comprehensive non-compete agreement. The non-compete covers all technology and software development in our market for a period of 3 years, Marcus explained, pointing to the relevant section. 3 years. Alexander wasn't just removing her from Meridian. He was effectively barring her from working in her field for 3 years. The calculated ruthlessness of it took her breath away. "And if I don't sign?" Vivian asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus's expression tightened slightly. "Mr. Reed hoped it wouldn't come to that. But should you choose not to accept these terms, the company is prepared to proceed with a performance-based termination." "Performance-based?" Vivian repeated, the words tasting bitter. Natalie leaned forward slightly. "There's documentation of several instances where your cautious approach caused Meridian to miss key market opportunities. The board has reviewed these cases and supports the assessment." Of course they had. Alexander had been systematically building his case, likely for months. The disagreements that she had thought were normal strategic debates between co-founders had been carefully documented and presented as failures on her part. Vivian looked at Natalie directly for the first time, taking in the woman who had been her husband's executive assistant for the past 2 years. She was younger, certainly, but it wasn't just youth that Alexander had chosen. It was compliance. Where Vivian challenged, Natalie supported. Where Vivian urged caution, Natalie encouraged risk. She was everything Vivian wasn't, and at this moment, that included being on the winning side of this corporate coup. "I'd like a moment to review the documents in private," Vivian said, her voice remarkably steady. "Of course," Stephanie replied, looking relieved at the prospect of a brief escape from the tension. "We'll be just outside when you're ready." As the door closed behind them, Vivian finally allowed her carefully maintained expression to crumble. The conference room that had felt small before now seemed to be closing in around her. She had helped build Meridian from an idea to a company valued at over $300 million, and now she was being erased. Efficiently, legally, completely. She flipped through the agreement, skimming the sections detailing what she would receive and what she would give up. The financial terms were indeed generous, as Marcus had said. Alexander was buying her silence and her absence at a premium price. A knock at the door startled her. Instead of Stephanie or the others, it was Lisa Kwan, Meridian's VP of Product Development, and one of the few executives Vivian had personally hired years ago. "I heard you were here," Lisa said, closing the door quickly behind her. "I don't have much time." "They've got me in the box signing my execution papers," Vivian said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lisa didn't return it. "Listen, to me, don't sign anything yet. Alexander's been planning this for months. He's been systematically discrediting your contributions in board meetings, revising project histories to minimize your role. I suspected as much, Vivian replied, a cold clarity beginning to replace the emotional fog she'd been in since last night. It's worse than you think, Lisa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He's moving Meridian in a completely new direction, massive leveraging for rapid acquisition of competitors. The conservative approach you've advocated? He's doing the exact opposite. He's gambling everything on aggressive expansion. Vivian felt a flicker of vindication. She'd been warning about the dangers of over-leveraging for months, concerns Alexander had dismissed as overly cautious. Why are you telling me this? Vivian asked. Lisa glanced nervously at the door. Because it's wrong, what he's doing. Not just to you personally, but to the company. And because, she hesitated, because I'm leaving too. I gave my notice this morning. Several of us are. The realization that she wasn't alone in her concerns about Alexander's leadership provided an unexpected spark of strength. If others could see it too, if Lisa, one of their most valuable executives, was walking away, perhaps Vivian's judgment hadn't been as clouded by emotion as Alexander had claimed. Thank you, Vivian said, reaching out to squeeze Lisa's hand. This means more than you know. Just be careful, Lisa warned, moving toward the door. Alexander's not the man we thought he was. And Natalie, she shook her head. She's ambitious, very ambitious. As Lisa slipped out, Vivian returned her attention to the agreement before her. The parameters of her challenge were now crystal clear. Alexander had orchestrated not just the end of their marriage, but the systematic dismantling of her professional reputation. He had rewritten their shared history to position himself as the visionary and Vivian as the liability. And he had selected in Natalie someone who would reinforce rather than challenge his worst instincts. The pain of betrayal remained, a physical ache beneath her ribs, but alongside it, something else was taking shape. A cold, clear determination. Alexander believed he had won. He believed she would sign these papers, take the money, and disappear into obscurity while he drove their company toward his vision of success. What he didn't understand, what he had always underestimated, was exactly what Vivian was capable of when pushed to her limits. When Stephanie, Marcus, and Natalie returned to the conference room, they found Vivian sitting calmly, the agreement closed before her. Have you had sufficient time to review the terms? Marcus asked, retaking his seat. Yes, Vivian replied. And I have a counter-proposal. The surprise on their faces would have been amusing under different circumstances. A counter-proposal isn't really the purpose of this meeting, Natalie began, her tone condescending. Nevertheless, I have one, Vivian continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. I'll sign the agreement as written, with one modification to the non-compete clause. Marcus frowned. The non-compete is a standard. I want it reduced. To 1 year instead of 3, Vivian interrupted. 1 year, and I walk away quietly. Mr. Reed was very specific about the 3-year term, Natalie said, her expression hardening. Vivian looked directly at her, seeing for the first time not just her replacement but her opponent. Then Mr. Reed can tell me that himself. I won't negotiate my future with his proxy. The tension in the room shifted palpably. This wasn't proceeding according to the script Alexander had prepared. I'll need to consult with Mr. Reed, Marcus said, gathering his papers. You do that? Vivian replied. I'll wait. As they filed out, leaving her alone again, Vivian felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This small act of resistance, this refusal to simply comply with Alexander's terms, was the first step toward reclaiming her agency. She didn't yet know how she would rebuild from these ashes. She couldn't imagine that in 5 years she would stand at the head of Meridian's boardroom table, watching Alexander's face contort with shock as she announced his termination. She had no way of knowing that this crushing defeat would eventually lead to her greatest triumph. But in this moment, in this sterile conference room where Alexander had intended to finalize her corporate execution, Vivian Chen made a silent promise to herself. This was not the end of her story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one that Alexander Reed would come to regret provoking with every fiber of his being. 45 minutes later, the door to conference room C opened again. Alexander Reed entered alone, his presence immediately filling the small space with a tension that hadn't existed before. He wore the gray Tom Ford suit Vivian had given him for his last birthday, the irony of which wasn't lost on her. "I understand we have a problem with the terms," he said without preamble, taking the seat across from her. Gone was any pretense of the man she had married. This was Alexander Reed, CEO of Meridian Enterprises, handling a business complication. "Not a problem," Vivian replied calmly. "A counteroffer." Alexander studied her, perhaps surprised by her composure. He had likely expected tears, emotional pleas, the overreaction he had always accused her of during their disagreements. "The 3-year non-compete is non-negotiable," he said finally. "The board is adamant about protecting Meridian's interests." "The board," Vivian repeated. "Or you, Alexander?" Something flickered across his face, irritation, perhaps, at being challenged. "In this case, our interests align perfectly. You know too much about our strategy, our clients, our intellectual property. 3 years gives us adequate protection. It also ensures I can't work in my field until I'm practically obsolete in the tech world," Vivian observed. "Quite convenient. For you." Alexander leaned back, his expression hardening. "This isn't personal, Vivian. It's business." The words hung in the air between them, so patently false that Vivian almost laughed. Nothing could be more personal than this. The man who had shared her bed, her dreams, her company, now clinically excising her from all three. "If it were just business," she said carefully, "you would have bought me out months ago when we first disagreed about the acquisition strategy. Instead, you built a case against me, documented our strategic disagreements as my failures, and presented them to the board only after you'd secured their loyalty." Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I?" Vivian leaned forward. "Tell me something, Alexander. When did it start with Natalie? Before or after you decided I was a liability to Meridian?" "That's irrelevant to these proceedings," he replied coldly. "Indulge me. It's the least you can do." Alexander checked his watch, a gesture Vivian recognized from countless meetings when he was growing impatient. "If you must know, Natalie, and I recognized our compatibility about a year ago. But that has nothing to do with this business decision. A year." While Vivian had been working 70-hour weeks helping build Meridian, Alexander had been pursuing her eventual replacement, professionally and personally. The timeline made the betrayal even more calculated than she had imagined. "I see," she said, her voice steady, despite the fresh wave of pain his admission triggered. "Well, since we're being so honest with each other, let me be clear about something. I built this company alongside you. Every client we signed, every product we developed, every dollar of funding we secured, I was there. You don't get to rewrite that history just because it's inconvenient for your new narrative." Alexander's expression remained impassive, but Vivian could see the subtle signs of his growing frustration. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tap of his index finger against the table. "No one is denying your early contributions," he said, his tone measured. "But companies evolve, Vivian. What Meridian needs now isn't what it needed 5 years ago. Your conservative approach was holding us back from necessary growth. My conservative approach kept us solvent during the 2018 downturn when 3 of our competitors folded," Vivian countered. My conservative approach is why we have a cash reserve while others operate on venture funding and prayer. Alexander's patience was visibly thinning. This is exactly why we're here today. You see threats everywhere, Vivian. I see opportunities. The tech world rewards bold moves, not cautious hedging. The tech world is littered with the corpses of companies that made bold moves on borrowed money, Vivian replied. She reached for the agreement, flipping to the non-compete section. 1 year, that's my offer. 1 year, and I sign everything else as is. Alexander studied her for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. 2 years. Final offer. Vivian considered. 2 years was still a significant handicap, but it wasn't the professional death sentence that 3 years would have been in the rapidly evolving tech industry. Fine, 2 years, she agreed. Have legal redraft it, and I'll sign this afternoon. Alexander nodded once, standing to signal the end of their negotiation. He hesitated for a moment, as if there were something more he wanted to say. Whatever it was, he thought better of it. The revised agreement will be ready by 3, he said, moving toward the door. Stephanie will contact you. Alexander, Vivian said, stopping him before he could leave. One more thing. He turned, his hand already on the door handle. You've won. You have the company, the board support, and Natalie. You have everything you want. Vivian met his gaze directly. Remember this moment. Something like unease flickered across Alexander's face before he masked it with a businesslike nod. Goodbye, Vivian. The door closed behind him, and Vivian was alone again in the sterile conference room. The conversation had transpired exactly as Alexander had planned, except for her small victory on the non-compete clause. He had arrived expecting capitulation and instead encountered resistance. It was minimal, certainly, but it was something. Vivian gathered her things slowly, in no rush to leave this final act of her time at Meridian. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see life continuing in the office beyond. Employees, at their desks, conversations in the hallway, the mundane rhythm of corporate existence undisturbed by the personal and professional earthquake she had just experienced. As she stepped out of conference room C for the last time, Vivian felt oddly disconnected from her surroundings, as if she were observing the scene from a great distance. The Meridian offices, once so familiar, now seemed alien, a place where she no longer belonged. She made her way to her office on the executive floor to collect her personal belongings, aware of the eyes following her progress. The corner office, that had been hers since Meridian's earliest days, was already being packed up. 2 facilities employees carefully removing her awards and photographs from the walls. Ms. Chen, one of them said, looking uncomfortable. We were told to have this cleared by end of day. I'm sorry, we didn't know you'd be coming by. It's fine, Vivian said, noting that the plants she had carefully tended for years had already been removed. I just need a few personal items. She gathered what remained. A small jade figurine that had been her grandfather's, a fountain pen from her first mentor, a framed photograph of her parents. So little to show for years of her life invested in these walls. Across the floor, through the glass partition that separated their offices, Vivian could see Alexander in conversation with Natalie. They weren't touching. They were too professional for that in the office. But there was an intimacy to their posture that spoke volumes. They were already planning, already moving forward into the future they had constructed on the ruins of her past. As Vivian placed her office key and security badge on the desk, her final surrender of the company she had helped build, something shifted within her. The pain was still there, a physical presence beneath her ribs, but it had transformed into something harder, more defined. Not yet determination, not quite resolve, but perhaps their precursor. A silent refusal to let this moment define the rest of her life. The elevator ride to the lobby was silent. the small box of personal items in her arms pathetically inadequate to represent what she had lost. In the reflective doors, Vivian caught a glimpse of herself, still composed, still dignified, still standing despite everything that had been taken from her. Outside, Seattle's notoriously fickle weather had shifted. The morning's clear skies replaced by gathering storm clouds that matched her internal landscape. As Vivian placed her box in the passenger seat of her car, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour that obscured the Meridian building behind sheets of water. She sat motionless behind the wheel, watching as employees hurried in and out of the building's revolving doors, umbrellas unfurling against the deluge. Somewhere in that building, Alexander and Natalie were continuing their day, perhaps already discussing who would take over Vivian's responsibilities, how they would distribute her projects. The thought should have devastated her anew, but instead, something unexpected happened. As rain pounded against the car roof, creating a cocoon of white noise around her, Vivian felt a moment of perfect clarity break through the emotional chaos of the past 24 hours. Alexander had taken her marriage. He had taken her company. He had taken her professional reputation. But he couldn't take her knowledge, her experience, her capabilities. Those remained firmly, irrevocably hers. The realization wasn't comfort exactly. The wounds were too fresh, too deep for anything approaching solace. But it was a foothold, a small, solid place to stand in the midst of the destruction. Vivian started the car, the familiar hum of the engine grounding her in the present moment. She had nowhere particular to go. The house she had shared with Alexander no longer felt like home, and her office was no longer hers. She was, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, completely untethered. The sensation was terrifying. It was also, she realized with surprise, oddly freeing. As she pulled away from Meridian Enterprises for what she believed was the last time, Vivian had no way of knowing what the next 5 years would bring. She couldn't imagine the company she would build, the strategies she would develop, the path that would eventually lead her back to this very building. Not as an ousted co-founder, but as its owner. All she knew in that moment was that the story Alexander had written for her, the narrative of the cautious, emotional wife who couldn't keep pace with his vision, was not the story she would accept. If she had to start again from nothing, she would. If she had to reinvent herself entirely, she would do that too. The rain continued to fall as Vivian drove away from her past and toward an unwritten future. Behind the wheel of her car, in the privacy of this transitional space between what had been and what would be, Vivian Chen made a decision that would alter the course of her life and, though she didn't know it yet, Alexander's as well. She would not disappear. She would not fade into obscurity. She would not become the cautionary tale of the woman left behind by a visionary ex-husband. Instead, she would become something Alexander had never anticipated, never prepared for, a worthy opponent. The thought wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was something more fundamental, a refusal to accept the ending Alexander had scripted for her. A decision to write her own story, whatever it might be. As Vivian navigated through Seattle's rain-slicked streets, she had no destination in mind. But for the first time since Alexander had walked out of their bedroom with his packed suitcase, she had something almost as important, a direction. Vivian drove aimlessly through Seattle's rain-soaked streets, the windshield wipers creating a hypnotic rhythm that matched her circling thoughts. As the familiar landmarks of the city passed by in a gray blur, her mind drifted back to the beginning, to the story of Meridian Enterprises that Alexander was now so determined to rewrite. 12 years ago, Vivian Chen had been a rising star at TechFusion, one of Seattle's established software companies. With a double master's in computer science and business administration, she had climbed the corporate ladder with remarkable speed, becoming the youngest project manager in the company's history by 28. It was at TechFusion that she first met Alexander Reed, a charismatic sales executive whose ability to charm clients was unmatched in the industry. Where Vivian excelled at product development and strategic planning, Alexander shined in presentation and persuasion. Their skills were complementary, their ambitions aligned. Their first collaboration had been on Project Aurora, a customer management system that TechFusion had been struggling to sell to enterprise clients. Vivian had redesigned the product's architecture to address critical performance issues, while Alexander had reframed the marketing strategy to emphasize its unique benefits. "We're unstoppable together," Alexander had said after they secured their third major client in as many months. "You build it better than anyone, and I sell it better than anyone. Imagine what we could do if we weren't constrained by TechFusion's bureaucracy." The idea of starting their own company had germinated during late nights at the office, fueled by ambition and the growing recognition of their combined potential. By day, they continued their ascent at TechFusion. By night, they sketched out business plans and product ideas for what would eventually become Meridian Enterprises. Their personal relationship had developed alongside their professional one. Cautiously at first, both aware of the potential complications, then with the same intensity that characterized their work, 6 months after Project Aurora's success, they were not just colleagues but partners in every sense. "We're building something that will last," Alexander had told her the night he proposed, 9 months into their relationship. "A legacy that combines the best of both of us." Vivian had believed him completely. She had seen in Alexander not just a brilliant salesman, but a visionary who could articulate the future she helped create. Together, they seemed poised to conquer the tech world on their own terms. The early days of Meridian had been exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. They had rented a small office space in a less desirable part of Seattle, investing their savings and a modest amount from friends and family. Their first product, a streamlined project management system for creative agencies, had been developed almost entirely by Vivian, with Alexander securing their initial clients through sheer force of personality and relentless networking. Vivian remembered those first months with painful clarity. The 18-hour workdays, the makeshift desk constructed from an old door and sawhorses, the instant ramen dinners eaten while debugging code late into the night. Alexander had been her rock during that period, his unwavering confidence buoying her when technical challenges seemed insurmountable. "This is just the beginning," he would say, massaging her shoulders as she hunched over her laptop. "5 years from now, we'll look back at these days from our corner offices and laugh about how we started." The memory now carried a bitter irony. They had indeed gotten those corner offices, but something fundamental had changed along the way. Something Vivian had been too busy building the company to fully recognize until it was too late. Meridian's first major breakthrough had come 2 years into their venture. Their project management software had caught the attention of a prominent venture capital firm after winning an Industry Innovation Award. The ensuing funding round had propelled them from struggling startup to emerging player in the Seattle tech scene. It was during this period of rapid growth that Vivian and Alexander had married. A small ceremony on a rented yacht in Puget Sound, attended by their growing team and key investors. The Seattle Times had featured them in a business profile titled "Power Couple Reshaping the Tech Landscape," accompanied by a photograph of them standing arm in arm against the Seattle skyline. "We complement each other perfectly," Alexander had told the interviewer. "Vivian is the brilliant mind behind our products, and I make sure the world knows about them. It's a partnership in the truest sense." Vivian stopped at a red light, the memory of those words bringing a fresh wave of pain. The partnership that Alexander had once celebrated had become, in his mind, a liability to be severed when it no longer served his ambitions. As Meridian continued to grow, their responsibilities had naturally divided along the lines of their strengths. Vivian overseeing product development and operations, Alexander handling sales, marketing, and investor relations. This division had seemed logical at the time, but looking back, Vivian could see how it had gradually created separate spheres of influence within the company. Alexander had become the public face of Meridian, the charismatic visionary who captivated investors and industry analysts. Vivian, meanwhile, had focused on building and maintaining the infrastructure that supported his promises, ensuring that the products delivered what Alexander claimed they could do. The first significant crack in their unified front had appeared during the Series B funding round, 4 years into Meridian's existence. Alexander had pushed for aggressive expansion into international markets, while Vivian had advocated for consolidating their position in North America first. "We need to strike while our valuation is high," Alexander had argued during a tense discussion in their home office. "The window of opportunity won't stay open forever." "Expanding too quickly could dilute our quality," Vivian had countered. "Our reputation is built on excellent products and service. If we compromise that for rapid growth, we risk everything we've built." The debate had escalated into their first truly serious argument as both business partners and spouses. In the end, they had reached a compromise, a measured expansion into European markets while maintaining their focus on product excellence. At the time, Vivian had viewed the resolution as evidence of their partnership's strength. Now she wondered if Alexander had seen it differently, as the first instance of her standing in the way of his grander vision. The subsequent years had brought increasing success and recognition for Meridian. Their client list expanded to include Fortune 500 companies, their product suite grew more sophisticated, their headquarters moved to the downtown skyscraper that Vivian had just left for the last time. With success had come new pressures and greater divergence in their management styles. Alexander pushed continually for faster development cycles, more aggressive marketing claims, and rapid expansion into adjacent markets. Vivian maintained her focus on sustainable growth, employee retention, and product integrity. These philosophical differences had manifested in increasingly frequent disagreements during executive meetings, disagreements that Vivian now realized Alexander had been documenting and framing as her resistance to innovation rather than legitimate strategic concerns. The watershed moment had come approximately a year ago, around the same time that Alexander had apparently begun his relationship with Natalie. Meridian had been approached by their largest competitor, Vertex Solutions, with a potential merger offer. Alexander had been enthusiastic about the possibility, seeing it as a fast track to becoming the undisputed industry leader. Vivian had been more cautious, concerned about the competitor's debt load and questionable accounting practices. She had conducted a thorough analysis of Vertex's financials and discovered several red flags that suggested the company was overvalued and potentially hiding significant liabilities. This merger would be a mistake, she had told the executive team, presenting her findings in a detailed report. Vertex is using creative accounting to mask serious cash flow problems. If we merge with them, we inherit those problems and put everything we've built at risk. Alexander had been visibly frustrated by her opposition, especially in front of the executive team. "This is exactly why we're falling behind more innovative companies," he had said dismissively. "Analysis paralysis. Sometimes you have to take bold action based on vision, not just spreadsheets." The merger discussions had ultimately been tabled, a decision that Alexander had clearly resented. Looking back, Vivian could now see that this had likely been the moment when he had decided she needed to be removed from Meridian's leadership. It was also around this time that Natalie Barnes had been promoted from the general administrative pool to become Alexander's dedicated executive assistant, a decision Vivian had supported, impressed by the young woman's efficiency and apparent dedication to the company. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle as Vivian found herself driving along the waterfront. To her right, the steel-gray waters of Puget Sound stretched toward the horizon. To her left, the city that had been the backdrop for her rise, fall, and, though she didn't know it yet, her eventual resurrection. 12 years of history with Alexander and Meridian played through her mind like a film being rewound and replayed with new context. Moments she had interpreted as standard business disagreements now appeared as deliberate stepping stones in Alexander's path to consolidate control. Decisions she had viewed as compromises were revealed as tactical retreats on his part, biding time until he could move forward unimpeded. The painful clarity of hindsight showed her not just Alexander's calculated dismantling of their partnership, but also her own blind spots, her assumption that their shared history and success would ultimately outweigh their strategic differences, her belief that their marriage vows would prevent him from seeing her as an obstacle to be removed rather than a partner to be valued. Most painfully, she recognized how she had allowed her identity to become so thoroughly intertwined with Meridian and with Alexander that his rejection of both their marriage and their business partnership had left her momentarily unable to envision a future for herself. As Vivian pulled into a parking space overlooking the water, she turned off the engine and sat in silence, watching ferries glide across the Sound against the backdrop of distant islands partially obscured by mist. 12 years of her life had been invested in building Meridian Enterprises. 12 years of early mornings, late nights, sacrificed weekends, and postponed personal goals, all dedicated to creating something she had believed was a shared vision. Alexander had taken that vision and claimed it as exclusively his own. He had rewritten their history, recasting himself as the sole visionary and Vivian as the cautious anchor dragging against his ambitions. And he had found in Natalie not just a romantic replacement, but a professional one, someone who would reinforce, rather than challenge his perspective. The betrayal was absolute, personal and professional, emotional and financial. It was designed to be total in its devastation, leaving Vivian with nothing but memories and a severance package meant to ensure her continued silence and irrelevance. What Alexander hadn't counted on, what he had fundamentally misunderstood, despite their years together, was that Vivian Chen was not defined solely by her relationship to him or to Meridian Enterprises. The skills, intelligence, and determination that had helped build a successful company from nothing remained intact, regardless of what had been taken from her. As the last of the rain clouds parted, allowing weak sunlight to glimmer across the water's surface, Vivian made a decision. She would sign the revised agreement tomorrow, accepting the 2-year non-compete restriction and whatever other terms Alexander demanded. And then she would begin the process of reinvention, not as Alexander Reed's ex-wife or as Meridian's former co-founder, but as Vivian Chen, a woman with 12 years of hard-won experience and a clarity of purpose that could only come from having lost everything that once defined her. She didn't yet know what form this reinvention would take. She couldn't imagine that 5 years later, she would stand at the head of Meridian's boardroom table, watching Alexander's face contort with shock as she announced her ownership of the company he had taken from her. All she knew was that the story wasn't over. It was merely entering a new chapter, one that Alexander Reed had not anticipated and could not control. The days immediately following Vivian's departure from Meridian passed in a blur of practical necessities. She signed the revised separation agreement, with its 2-year non-compete clause, without further negotiation. She put the house she had shared with Alexander on the market, unable to bear the echoing emptiness of spaces once filled with shared ambitions. She moved into a minimalist downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, a clean slate, devoid of memories. These actions were performed with mechanical efficiency, her emotional responses temporarily suspended as she focused on the logistics of dismantling her former life. Friends and family expressed concern about her composed demeanor, expecting tears or rage that never materialized. What they couldn't see was that beneath this calm exterior, Vivian was meticulously analyzing her situation with the same strategic thinking she had once applied to Meridian's business challenges. 1 month after signing the separation agreement, on a crisp autumn morning, Vivian sat at her new dining table with a blank notebook before her. The page was headed with a single question. What now? The non-compete agreement prevented her from working directly in software development for enterprise clients, the field she had dedicated her career to thus far. Alexander had effectively blocked her most obvious path forward, but as Vivian stared at the blank page, she recognized that this restriction, while significant, was also narrowly defined. She couldn't create products that competed with Meridian for 2 years. She couldn't work for Meridian's competitors. But there were no restrictions on consulting, on education, on investment activities, or on developing expertise in adjacent industries. The realization sparked the first genuine smile she had experienced since Alexander's departure. He had tried to build a cage, but had left multiple doors unlocked. By evening, her blank page had transformed into a complex mind map detailing potential paths forward. 3 main branches emerged from her central question: knowledge development, gaining expertise in areas complementary to, but not directly, competing with her existing skill set; network building, cultivating relationships with key players in the tech industry who might become allies in her future endeavors; financial positioning, strategically investing her severance package to build resources for whatever came next. Over the following weeks, these 3 branches became Vivian's roadmap. She enrolled in an intensive financial analysis program at the University of Washington, focusing specifically on mergers and acquisitions in the tech sector. She joined 3 industry organizations focused on women in technology leadership, carefully selecting those that Alexander had always dismissed as unnecessary networking. Most significantly, she reached out to Lisa Kwan, who had left Meridian shortly after Vivian's departure. "I'm not asking you to betray any confidences," Vivian assured Lisa over coffee at a quiet cafe far from Meridian's offices. "I just want to understand what's happening in the industry from someone whose judgment I trust." Lisa studied Vivian carefully before responding. "Alexander is doing exactly what you warned against. Meridian has acquired 3 smaller competitors in the past 6 months, all financed through significant leveraging. The tech press is calling him visionary. The financial analysts are more skeptical." "And Natalie?" Vivian asked, surprising herself with how steady her voice remained when speaking her replacement's name. "Promoted to VP of Strategic Initiatives," Lisa replied. "She's smart, I'll give her that. But she's also completely aligned with Alexander's high-risk approach. There's no counterbalance anymore." This information became the foundation for Vivian's next moves. If Alexander was over-leveraging Meridian in an aggressive acquisition spree, he was creating vulnerability that might eventually be exploited. The thought wasn't yet a plan, merely an observation filed away for future reference. 6 months into her transformation journey, Vivian made her first public appearance at Seattle's annual Women in Tech Leadership Summit. She had been invited to participate in a panel discussion on resilience and reinvention in the industry, topics she now had intimate experience with. The moderator introduced her as Meridian Enterprises co-founder, a description that once would have pained her, but now felt like ancient history. When asked about her current projects, Vivian smiled with genuine enthusiasm. "I'm in a unique position of being able to step back and evaluate the industry from a new perspective," she explained. "After years of focusing exclusively on product development and operations, I'm now exploring the financial and strategic forces shaping technology's future. It's been illuminating." The response was measured, revealing nothing of her longer-term intentions while establishing her as someone evolving rather than diminished by recent changes. After the panel, Vivian found herself surrounded by women eager to connect: CEOs of smaller tech companies, venture capitalists specializing in women-led startups, financial analysts focused on the technology sector. One conversation proved particularly significant. Eleanor Blackwell, founding partner at Blackwell Venture Partners, handed Vivian her card with a directness that cut through the usual networking pleasantries. "When you decide what you're building next, call me," Eleanor said. "I've followed Your work for years. Alexander Reed may be the face people recognize, but industry insiders know who really built Meridian's backbone. Vivian accepted the card, tucking it carefully into her portfolio. I'm under a non-compete for another 18 months. Eleanor's smile was knowing. Non-competes restrict what you can build, not what you can learn, who you can meet, or how you can prepare. Time spent in strategic preparation is never wasted. That conversation marked a turning point in Vivian's journey. Until then, she had been focused primarily on recovery and rebuilding her individual skills. Eleanor's interest sparked something more ambitious. The first glimmer of a plan that extended beyond personal reinvention to something that might eventually intersect with Meridian's future. Over the next year, Vivian methodically expanded her knowledge and network. She completed 3 specialized financial courses focused on corporate valuation, leveraged buyouts, and distressed asset acquisition. She consulted for venture capital firms evaluating potential investments in the tech sector, providing technical expertise that helped them avoid costly missteps. Most importantly, she began tracking Meridian's activities with careful attention to patterns that others might miss. Each press release announcing a new acquisition was followed by Vivian's detailed analysis of the purchased company's technology, client base, and financial health. She built comprehensive models projecting Meridian's likely debt structure and cash flow requirements. She noted which executives remained from her era and which had been replaced by Alexander's loyalists. This wasn't obsession or vengeance. It was strategic intelligence gathering, performed with the detached precision that had always characterized Vivian's approach to business challenges. 18 months after leaving Meridian, Vivian registered a new entity, Horizon Capital Partners. The name was a subtle nod to her past, the horizon line visible from the Meridian offices she had helped design, but pointed firmly toward the future. Horizon's mission statement was carefully crafted, identifying undervalued assets and unrealized potential in the technology sector. Vague enough to cover multiple activities, specific enough to attract the right partners. With her severance package as initial capital and Eleanor Blackwell's firm as a significant investor, Vivian began assembling a team of financial and technical experts who shared her vision. We're not building products, she explained to her small but growing team during their first strategy session. We're building capability, the ability to recognize opportunity when it appears and move decisively, when timing is right. What Vivian didn't share, even with her closest advisors, was the specific opportunity she had begun to see taking shape on the horizon. Meridian's aggressive expansion under Alexander's leadership was showing early signs of strain. 2 consecutive quarters had seen them just barely meeting earnings expectations. Industry analysts had started questioning the sustainability of their acquisition strategy. The company's debt-to-equity ratio had reached levels that would make refinancing challenging in anything less than ideal market conditions. These weren't yet critical problems. Meridian remained profitable and growing, but they were hairline. Cracks in the foundation that only someone intimately familiar with the company's true structure would recognize as potentially serious. 22 months after signing the separation agreement, with the non-compete restriction just weeks from expiring, Vivian received an unexpected call from James Patterson, one of Meridian's original board members, and the only one who had occasionally sided with her strategic perspective during her final year at the company. This is probably crossing a line, James began without preamble. But I think you should know that Vertex Solutions is making another approach to acquire Meridian. Vivian's pulse quickened. Vertex, the same competitor whose merger Alexander had pushed for and Vivian had opposed due to their questionable financials. That's interesting timing, she replied carefully. May I ask why you're telling me this? James was silent for a moment before answering. Because you were right about them 2 years ago. Their financials are even more concerning now, but Alexander is championing the deal as Meridian's path to market dominance. The board is divided. After ending the call, Vivian stood at her apartment window, looking out at the Seattle skyline, where Meridian's headquarters was clearly visible among the downtown towers. The information James had shared wasn't just industry gossip. It was a potential inflection point that aligned perfectly with the capabilities she had spent nearly 2 years developing. If Alexander pushed through a merger with Vertex despite their fundamental weaknesses, he would be creating a dangerously over-leveraged entity. If market conditions shifted even slightly in an unfavorable direction, the combined company would face serious liquidity challenges. Those challenges would create vulnerability, and vulnerability created opportunity for those prepared to act. Vivian reached for her phone, scrolling to Eleanor Blackwell's contact. "Eleanor? It's time to discuss Phase 2. Are you available for dinner tonight?" As she ended the call, Vivian felt a calm certainty settle over her. The past 22 months had transformed her from Meridian's discarded co-founder into the head of a specialized investment firm with growing resources and strategic connections throughout the industry. She had rebuilt herself professionally while developing expertise specifically designed to recognize and capitalize on exactly the situation that now appeared to be developing at Meridian. Alexander had removed her from the company they had built together, believing he was eliminating an obstacle to his ambitions. In doing so, he had inadvertently created something much more dangerous: a highly motivated observer with intimate knowledge of Meridian's inner workings and no loyalty to his leadership. The non-compete agreement that was meant to sideline Vivian had instead given her the gift of time. Time to study, to plan, to build new alliances, and to position herself precisely where she needed to be when opportunity emerged. As Vivian prepared for her dinner with Eleanor, selecting a sharp black suit that symbolized this new chapter, she reflected on how completely her journey had transformed her. The devastated woman who had sat paralyzed in her car outside Meridian headquarters nearly 2 years ago had evolved into someone new, someone with clearer vision, colder calculation, and absolute confidence in her ability to recognize and seize the right moment when it came. That moment she now believed was rapidly approaching, and when it arrived, Alexander Reed would discover just how thoroughly he had underestimated the woman he had discarded. Exactly 2 years and 1 day after signing the separation agreement with Meridian, Vivian Chen sat in the pristine conference room of Horizon Capital Partners, surrounded by her carefully assembled team of financial analysts, industry experts, and legal advisors. The wall-to-wall windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, with Meridian's headquarters clearly visible in the distance, a visual reminder of their target. "The non-compete restriction expired at midnight," Vivian began, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "As of today, we are free to pursue any opportunity in the enterprise software space, including potential actions involving Meridian Enterprises." Eleanor Blackwell, who had become Vivian's closest advisor and Horizon's principal investor, leaned forward. "And the timing couldn't be better. The Meridian-Vertex merger announcement yesterday triggered exactly the market response we anticipated." On the large screen at the front of the room, financial charts displayed Meridian's stock performance, a sharp 22% decline following the merger announcement. The market had reacted with the skepticism that Vivian had predicted, recognizing the fundamental flaws in combining two companies with overlapping products and concerning debt structures. "Our analysis suggests that Meridian will need to secure additional financing within the next 3 months to complete the merger and manage the consolidated debt," explained Rajiv Mehta, Horizon's lead financial strategist. "Given the current market conditions and rising interest rates, they'll face significant challenges in obtaining favorable terms." Vivian nodded, the scenario unfolding exactly as she had projected. "And their existing creditors?" Increasingly nervous, Rajiv confirmed. "I've had informal conversations with representatives from Atlantic Capital, who hold the largest portion of Meridian's current debt. They're concerned about the company's direction, but aren't yet ready to take action." For 2 hours, the team methodically reviewed their intelligence on Meridian's vulnerable position. The company was not yet in crisis. It remained profitable and maintained strong client relationships, but Alexander's aggressive expansion strategy had created precarious financial scaffolding that could collapse under the right pressure. The meeting concluded. Eleanor remained behind while the others filed out. She studied Vivian with the shrewd assessment that had made her one of Seattle's most successful venture capitalists. "We've prepared for this moment for nearly 2 years," Eleanor observed. "You've built Horizon specifically to position yourself for this opportunity. But I need to ask the question everyone's thinking but no one dares to voice. Is this about sound business strategy or personal vindication?" Vivian met her gaze directly. "Both," she answered with uncharacteristic candor. "I won't pretend there isn't personal satisfaction in the prospect of reclaiming what Alexander took from me. But that wouldn't be enough to justify the financial risk we're contemplating." She stood, moving to the window to look out at Meridian's headquarters. "The merger with Vertex is fundamentally flawed for all the reasons outlined in our analysis. It's driven by Alexander's ego and ambition, rather than sound business judgment. Meridian is worth saving from his mismanagement, not just for me, but for the employees who remain, the clients who depend on their products, and yes, for our investors who stand to profit significantly if we execute this correctly." Eleanor joined her at the window, seemingly satisfied with Vivian's response. "Then let's make the next move." The following weeks saw Horizon Capital Partners executing a carefully orchestrated strategy. While remaining below the reporting thresholds that would require public disclosure, Horizon began acquiring small positions in Meridian through various investment vehicles. Simultaneously, Vivian initiated discreet conversations with key Meridian board members, institutional investors, and creditors. The approach was surgical in its precision. Not a hostile takeover attempt, but a methodical positioning as a potential solution to the growing concerns about Meridian's direction under Alexander's leadership. 3 months after the merger announcement, the pivotal moment Vivian had anticipated arrived. Meridian's quarterly earnings report showed the company missing projections for the first time in its history, with cash reserves dangerously depleted by acquisition costs. The stock dropped another 18% in a single day, triggering margin calls for several large investors and creating a cascade of forced selling. That evening, Vivian received the call she had been waiting for. James Patterson's name appeared on her phone screen, his timing as predictable as she had anticipated. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow," James said without preamble. "The Vertex merger is falling apart. Their financials were even worse than you suspected 2 years ago. They've been hiding substantial losses with accounting tricks that came to light during final due diligence." "That's unfortunate timing for Alexander," Vivian replied, carefully neutral in her response. "Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it," James continued. "The banks are threatening to call in their loans unless we bring in new leadership and capital. Immediately, several board members mentioned your name today. They've heard about Horizon Capital and your recent activities." Vivian allowed a moment of silence before responding. "What exactly are you asking, James?" Would Horizon consider a significant investment in Meridian, combined with a leadership change? The question was direct, exactly what Vivian had been positioning for over the past 2 years. "We might," she replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the surge of vindication she felt. "I'd need to review the current financials, the real ones, not the version presented to analysts. And any discussion would need to include complete leadership restructuring, not just cosmetic changes." "The board meets at 9 a.m. tomorrow," James Dewise said. "Could you present a preliminary proposal by then?" "I'll see you at 9, Vivian confirmed, ending the call with a steady hand, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. For the next 12 hours, Vivian and her team worked without pause, preparing a comprehensive rescue package for Meridian. The proposal was meticulously crafted to appeal to the board's urgent needs, while establishing terms that would give Horizon, and by extension Vivian, controlling interest in the company. At precisely 8:45 the following morning, Vivian walked through the revolving doors of Meridian's headquarters for the first time in 2 years. The security guard at the front desk did a double-take, recognition dawning on his face. "Ms. Chen, it's been a while." "Hello, Michael," she replied with a genuine smile. "I have a meeting with the board." As she rode the elevator to the executive floor, Vivian experienced an odd sense of déjà vu. The same elevator, the same subtle scent of the building's ventilation system, yet everything fundamentally different. She was no longer the discarded co-founder leaving with a box of personal belongings. She was now CEO of Horizon Capital Partners, arriving with a lifeline that Meridian desperately needed. The boardroom looked exactly as she remembered it. The long mahogany table, the views of Puget Sound, the subtle displays of corporate success on the walls. 8 board members were already seated when she entered, their expressions a mix of anxiety, curiosity, and in some cases, visible discomfort at her presence. James Patterson rose to greet her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Vivian. The board is eager to hear Horizon's perspective on Meridian's current situation." Vivian took the offered seat, placing her presentation materials on the table. She noted Alexander's conspicuous absence with mild surprise. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to understand who will be joining us. I was expecting the full board, including the CEO." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Patricia Winters, the board chair, cleared her throat. "Alexander was asked not to attend this particular meeting. Given the nature of our discussion, potential new investment and leadership changes, the board felt it would be more productive to speak freely." The revelation was unexpected but advantageous. Alexander had already been sidelined, making Vivian's proposal easier to present without immediate resistance. For the next hour, Vivian outlined Horizon's analysis of Meridian's current challenges and their proposed solution: a significant capital injection in exchange for controlling interest, immediate termination of the Vertex merger, and complete restructuring of executive leadership. "Our due diligence confirms that Meridian's core business remains strong," Vivian explained, her command of the company's finances clearly impressing the board. "The current crisis stems from over-leveraging and strategic missteps in acquisition targets, not fundamental product or market failures." She deliberately avoided any personal references to her history with the company or with Alexander, maintaining strictly professional language as she detailed Horizon's rescue plan. The board members asked pointed questions about timelines, financial terms, and leadership transitions, all of which Vivian addressed with composed expertise. As the discussion progressed, Vivian could feel the energy in the room shifting. The initial wariness was being replaced by cautious optimism, as board members recognized that Horizon's proposal represented their best option for averting a complete collapse. "There's one aspect we haven't discussed explicitly," Patricia said, as the presentation concluded. "Leadership. Your proposal references executive restructuring, but doesn't specify who would lead Meridian through this transition and beyond." The moment Vivian had prepared for had arrived. She closed her portfolio, deliberately before responding. Horizon's investment would be contingent on installation of new leadership with proven experience in corporate turnarounds and intimate knowledge of Meridian's operations, culture, and technology, she stated. "Given those requirements, I would step in as interim CEO during the stabilization period." The statement hung in the air, its implications fully registering with each board member. Vivian watched as expressions shifted from surprise to calculation to gradual acceptance. For some, like James Patterson, there was even visible relief. "You built this company once," James observed. "You understand it better than anyone. And that's precisely why I'm uniquely qualified to save it now," Vivian confirmed, her confidence absolute. Patricia exchanged glances with several other board members before addressing Vivian again. We'll need to deliberate on Horizon's proposal, but speaking personally, I find the terms reasonable given our situation. How quickly could you move forward if the board approves? Horizon is prepared to execute immediately, Vivian replied. Our legal team has draft agreements ready, and the capital is secured. We could announce the investment and leadership change as early as tomorrow morning before markets open. The speed of her response clearly impressed the board, reinforcing the image of Horizon as a decisive, prepared savior rather than an opportunistic vulture. There is one other matter, Vivian added, her tone remaining professional despite the personal satisfaction she felt at what would come next. Any agreement would require immediate termination of Alexander Reed's position and comprehensive review of recent executive decisions, including the proposed Vertex merger and several other questionable transactions our analysis has identified. There, the first direct reference to Alexander, delivered as a non-negotiable business condition rather than personal vengeance. Patricia nodded slowly. The board has already reached the painful conclusion that a leadership change is necessary. Your condition aligns with our own assessment. As the meeting concluded, Vivian was asked to wait in an adjacent conference room while the board deliberated. Through the glass walls, she could see their animated discussion, the occasional glance in her direction, the gradual nodding of heads as consensus formed. Exactly 43 minutes later, Patricia entered the conference room where Vivian waited. The board has voted unanimously to accept Horizon Capital's proposal, subject to final legal review of the terms. We're prepared to move forward with the leadership transition immediately. Vivian stood, extending her hand to the board chair. Meridian has a strong foundation and dedicated team. With proper leadership and strategic direction, I'm confident we can stabilize the situation quickly. There is one detail you should be aware of, Patricia added with slight hesitation. Alexander doesn't yet know about the board's decision. He's scheduled to be in the office this afternoon for what he believes is a routine update on the Vertex situation. Given your history, would you prefer that we handle that conversation before you assume your position? Vivian considered the option briefly before shaking her head. No, that won't be necessary. As Meridian's new CEO, handling difficult transitions will be part of my responsibility. I'll speak with Alexander personally. As Patricia left to inform the rest of the board of their decision, Vivian remained alone in the conference room, the magnitude of what had just transpired washing over her. 2 years of meticulous planning, strategic positioning, and patient waiting had culminated in this moment of complete reversal. Alexander had forced her out of the company they had built together, believing he was eliminating an obstacle to his ambitions. Now, she would return as his successor, tasked with saving Meridian from the very risks she had warned against. The symmetry was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. Yet Vivian knew it was the result not of fate, but of careful calculation. Her ability to recognize Alexander's fundamental weaknesses and position herself precisely where she needed to be when those weaknesses inevitably created vulnerability. She looked out at the Seattle skyline from the conference room windows. Vivian felt neither triumph nor revenge, but a calm certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Meridian was her company, had always been her company in the eye. Ways that truly mattered. Now she would have the opportunity to prove it, not just to Alexander, but to everyone. The pivotal moment of her transformation was complete. Vivian Chen, once discarded as irrelevant to Meridian's future, was now the only person who could secure that future. And Alexander Reed was about to discover just how profound a miscalculation he had made in underestimating the woman he had betrayed. News of the board's decision traveled through Meridian's headquarters with astonishing speed. By the time Vivian left the boardroom, the executive floor was already buzzing with whispered conversations and speculative glances. Employees who remembered her from before stopped mid-stride, their expressions cycling through recognition, confusion, and in many cases, barely concealed hope. Diane Matthews, who had been Vivian's executive assistant years ago before being reassigned after Alexander's takeover, approached with visible emotion. "Ms. Chen, is it true? Are you coming back to Meridian?" Vivian smiled warmly at the familiar face. "Yes, Diane, though the official announcement won't be made until tomorrow morning." Diane's professional composure momentarily cracked, revealing genuine relief. "The company needs you. It hasn't been the same since—" She stopped herself, glancing around nervously. "I understand," Vivian reassured her. "And I appreciate your discretion until the formal announcement. Would you know if Alexander is in the building yet?" "Mr. Reed is scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock for the Vertex update meeting," Diane confirmed. "He's been working from home most mornings recently." This information aligned perfectly with Vivian's plans. She had 4 hours to prepare for the conversation that would culminate her 2-year journey from ousted co-founder to returning CEO. "I'll need temporary access to the system and a meeting room for the afternoon," Vivian said. "And please clear my old office. I'll be using it immediately following the board's announcement tomorrow." "Your old office?" Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's Mr. Reed's office now." "I'm aware," Vivian replied simply. "Please make the necessary arrangements." As Diane hurried off to implement these requests, James Patterson approached from the boardroom. "The legal team is preparing the final documents. They'll be ready for signatures by this afternoon." He hesitated before adding, "Are you certain? You want to handle the conversation with Alexander personally? It could be volatile." "I'm certain," Vivian confirmed. "Some conversations need to happen face-to-face." The hours before Alexander's arrival passed in a whirlwind of activity. Vivian met with the financial team to get real-time data on Meridian's position. She reviewed the employee roster, noting who remained from her era and who had been brought in by Alexander. She studied the most recent product development plans, quickly identifying strengths to maintain and weaknesses to address. Throughout these meetings, Vivian maintained absolute professionalism, betraying no hint of personal satisfaction at her imminent return to power. But beneath this composed exterior, she was acutely aware of the approaching moment when she would face Alexander directly, not as his discarded wife and partner, but as the person who now held his professional fate in her hands. At precisely 1:55 p.m., Vivian positioned herself in Conference Room A, adjacent to the main boardroom where Alexander was scheduled to meet with Patricia and several other board members at 2 down. Through the glass walls, she could observe without being immediately visible, giving the board time to deliver the initial news before she joined the conversation. Alexander arrived at 2:10, his characteristic 10 minutes late, a power move he had always employed to remind others of his perceived importance. From her vantage point, Vivian could see him clearly. The same confident stride, the same perfectly tailored suit, the same practiced smile as he greeted the board members. He seemed entirely unaware of the professional execution he was walking into. Even from a distance, Vivian could pinpoint the exact moment when Alexander realized something was wrong. His posture stiffened, the smile froze, and then disappeared. His hand that had been gesturing emphatically dropped to his side. Patricia was speaking, her expression grave, the other board members watching Alexander's reaction with careful neutrality. Alexander suddenly stood, his movement so abrupt that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall behind him. He was speaking rapidly, his gestures becoming more animated as Patricia continued to deliver what was clearly unwelcome news. Though Vivian couldn't hear the words, the body language told the story clearly. Denial, anger, attempted negotiation, all cycling through in quick succession. Patricia glanced toward Conference Room A, the prearranged signal that indicated it was time for Vivian to join them. With a deep breath, she gathered her materials and walked the short distance to the boardroom, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor in a steady cadence that matched her heartbeat. When she pushed open the boardroom door, Alexander's back was to her. He was still arguing with Patricia, his voice raised enough that Vivian caught the end of his statement. Completely unacceptable. The board can't possibly think that bringing in outside investors without my approval is anything but a direct violation of— The board's decision is unanimous, Alexander, Patricia interrupted firmly. And the investor isn't an outsider. Not to Meridian. At that moment, Alexander sensed the presence behind him and turned. The sequence of emotions that crossed his face in the next 3 seconds was something Vivian would remember for the rest of her life. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror as understanding settled in. "Hello, Alexander," Vivian said calmly, moving to the table and placing her portfolio on its polished surface. "It's been a while." Alexander stared at her as if she were an apparition. "What is this?" he demanded, looking from Vivian to Patricia and back again. "What is she doing here?" "Ms. Chen is the CEO of Horizon Capital Partners," Patricia explained with professional detachment. "As I was explaining, the board has accepted Horizon's investment proposal, which includes a leadership change effective immediately." The color drained from Alexander's face as the full implications registered. "This is a joke," he said, though his expression suggested he already knew it wasn't. "Vivian doesn't have the resources or experience to— Horizon Capital Partners has secured $175 million in committed capital," Vivian interrupted, her voice steady. "Our due diligence on Meridian has been thorough, including comprehensive analysis of the failed Vertex merger that has placed the company in its current precarious position." A muscle twitched in Alexander's jaw, a tell Vivian recognized from their marriage, a sign of fury barely contained. "You've been planning this," he said, the accusation barely above a whisper. "All this time, you've been waiting for an opportunity to save the company we built from your mismanagement?" "Yes." Vivian maintained her professional tone despite the personal satisfaction coursing through her. "The non-compete agreement. You insisted upon expired yesterday. Horizon's offer was presented to the board this morning. The timing is fortuitous." Alexander turned to Patricia, attempting one last appeal. "This is personal vendetta, not business strategy. Surely the board can see that." "What the board sees," Patricia cut in firmly, "is a company on the verge of financial crisis due to your acquisition strategy and a concrete rescue plan presented by someone with intimate knowledge of Meridian's operations. Ms. Chen's history with the company is an asset in this situation, not a liability." Alexander's gaze swept the room, searching for allies and finding none. The board members who had supported his leadership for years now sat in uncomfortable silence, their loyalties shifted to the company's survival rather than its current CEO. "The terms of your separation are outlined here," Vivian said, sliding a document across the table toward him. "The board has approved a generous severance package, contingent upon immediate transition and your full cooperation during the announcement period." Alexander didn't reach for the document. Instead, he focused entirely on Vivian, his initial shock now hardening into cold fury. "You won't be able to run this company," he said, echoing almost verbatim the words he had spoken when ending their marriage. "You don't have what it takes." The parallel wasn't lost on Vivian. For a moment, she was transported back to that devastating night in their bedroom, Alexander packing his suitcase while dismissing her professional capabilities. The symmetry of this moment, the complete reversal of their positions, was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. "That's not for you to determine anymore," Vivian replied calmly. "The decision has been made. Your access to Meridian systems will be revoked effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect personal belongings from your office." The mention of his office, once hers, soon to be hers again, seemed to finally break through Alexander's disbelief. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with visible impact. "You can't do this," he said, but the words lacked conviction. The shareholders will be informed of the change in leadership before markets open tomorrow, Patricia interjected. Given Meridian's recent performance and the failure of the Vertex merger, we anticipate a positive response to the announcement of new investment and leadership. Alexander's phone buzzed, drawing his attention momentarily. His expression shifted as he read the message on the screen. Natalie says IT just locked her out of the system, he said, looking up with renewed anger. What is this, Vivian? A purge of everyone associated with me? Not at all, Vivian replied. Ms. Barnes has valuable skills. She'll be offered a position in our Portland office, should she wish to remain with the company. The deliberate echo of how Alexander had handled Natalie's role in Vivian's own removal was subtle, but unmistakable. Portland was a secondary office, far from the decision-making center of Seattle. A significant demotion without being an outright termination. Alexander's laugh was bitter. So that's what this is. Revenge served cold, is that it? Vivian met his gaze directly. This isn't about revenge, Alexander. It's about reclaiming what we built together, what you nearly destroyed with your reckless acquisitions and over-leveraging. Meridian is worth saving, even if your position within it isn't. The boardroom fell silent as the former spouses regarded each other across the polished mahogany table. For Vivian, the moment carried none of the vindictive satisfaction she might once have anticipated. Instead, she felt a calm certainty that this outcome was both just and necessary, not merely for her personal redemption, but for the company's survival. Security is waiting outside, Patricia finally said, breaking the tense silence. They'll escort you to gather your personal items. Alexander's gaze remained locked on Vivian. This isn't over, he said quietly. Actually, it is, Vivian replied with finality. Goodbye, Alexander. As security personnel entered the boardroom, Alexander finally reached for the separation agreement, tucking it into his suit jacket without reading it. His movements were stiff, mechanical, a man operating on autopilot as his reality reconstructed itself around him. Vivian watched as he was escorted from the room, his tall frame suddenly seeming diminished, his confident stride replaced by halting steps. The parallels to her own departure 2 years earlier were striking. The box of personal items, the revoked access, the watching eyes of colleagues as a once powerful executive was reduced to a departing employee. When Alexander had disappeared from view, Patricia turned to Vivian. That was intense, she observed, but handled well. Thank you, Vivian replied, already refocusing on the tasks ahead. We should meet with the executive team immediately. They'll need reassurance and clear direction before tomorrow's announcement. As they prepared to address Meridian's leadership team, Vivian's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Blackwell. Contract signed. Funding secured. Congratulations. CEO Chen. The simple text marked the official completion of Vivian's transformation from discarded co-founder to returning savior. In just 2 years, she had rebuilt herself professionally, created a successful investment firm, and positioned herself perfectly to reclaim what had been taken from her. As word of the leadership change spread through Meridian's headquarters, Vivian could feel the atmosphere shifting. Tension gave way to cautious optimism. Uncertainty transformed into possibilities. Employees who had witnessed her departure now watched her return with expressions ranging from shock to relief to undisguised hope. Alexander didn't reach for the document. Instead, he focused entirely on Vivian, his initial shock now hardening into cold fury. You won't be able to run this company, he said, echoing almost verbatim the words he had spoken when ending their marriage. You don't have what it takes. The parallel wasn't lost on Vivian. For a moment, she was transported back to that devastating night in their bedroom, Alexander packing his suitcase while dismissing her professional capabilities. The symmetry of this moment, the complete reversal of their positions, was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. That's not for you to determine anymore, Vivian replied calmly. The decision has been made. Your access to Meridian systems will be revoked effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect personal belongings from your office. The mention of his office, once hers, soon to be hers again, seemed to finally break through Alexander's disbelief. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with visible impact. You can't do this, he said. But the words lacked conviction. The shareholders will be informed of the change in leadership before markets open tomorrow, Patricia interjected. Given Meridian's recent performance and the failure of the Vertex merger, we anticipate a positive response to the announcement of new investment and leadership. Alexander's phone buzzed, drawing his attention momentarily. His expression shifted as he read the message on the screen. Natalie says IT just locked her out of the system, he said, looking up with renewed anger. What is this, Vivian? A purge of everyone associated with me? Not at all, Vivian replied. Ms. Barnes has valuable skills. She'll be offered a position in our Portland office should she wish to remain with the company. The deliberate echo of how Alexander had handled Natalie's role in Vivian's own removal was subtle but unmistakable. Portland was a secondary office, far from the decision-making center of Seattle, a significant demotion without being an outright termination. Alexander's laugh was bitter. So that's what this is. Revenge served cold, is that it? Vivian met his gaze directly. This isn't about revenge, Alexander. It's about reclaiming what we built together, what you nearly destroyed with your reckless acquisitions and over-leveraging. Meridian is worth saving, even if your position within it isn't. The boardroom fell silent as the former spouses regarded each other across the polished mahogany table. For Vivian, the moment carried none of the vindictive satisfaction she might once have anticipated. Instead, she felt a calm certainty that this outcome was both just and necessary, not merely for her personal redemption, but for the company's survival. Security is waiting outside, Patricia finally said, breaking the tense silence. They'll escort you to gather your personal items. Alexander's gaze remained locked on Vivian. This isn't over, he said quietly. Actually, it is, Vivian replied with finality. Goodbye, Alexander. As security personnel entered the boardroom, Alexander finally reached for the separation agreement, tucking it into his suit jacket without reading it. His movements were stiff, mechanical, a man operating on autopilot as his reality reconstructed itself around him. Vivian watched as he was escorted from the room, his tall frame suddenly seeming diminished, his confident stride replaced by halting steps. The parallels to her own departure 2 years earlier were striking. The box of personal items, the revoked access, the watching eyes of colleagues as a once powerful executive was reduced to a departing employee. When Alexander had disappeared from view, Patricia turned to Vivian. That was intense, she observed, but handled well. Thank you, Vivian replied, already refocusing on the tasks ahead. We should meet with the executive team immediately. They'll need reassurance and clear direction before tomorrow's announcement. As they prepared to address Meridian's leadership team, Vivian's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Blackwell. Contract signed. Funding secured. Congratulations. CEO Chen. The simple text marked the official completion of Vivian's transformation from discarded co-founder to returning savior. In just 2 years, she had rebuilt herself professionally, created a successful investment firm, and positioned herself perfectly to reclaim what had been taken from her. As word of the leadership change spread through Meridian's headquarters, Vivian could feel the atmosphere shifting. Tension gave way to cautious optimism. Uncertainty transformed into possibilities. Employees who had witnessed her departure now watched her return with expressions ranging from shock to relief to undisguised hope. Regardless of her choice, I expect all of you to maintain absolute professionalism during this transition. Meridian's culture will be defined by respect, accountability, and performance, starting now. The executives filed out with new assignments and a clear understanding of Meridian's direction under Vivian's leadership. Several lingered to speak with her privately, some expressing support, others asking pointed questions about their department's futures. Vivian addressed each conversation with the same focused attention and strategic clarity she had demonstrated throughout the meeting. By evening, Vivian had completed individual sessions with the finance team, the product development directors, and the sales leadership, all critical components of her stabilization strategy. In each meeting, she demonstrated not just executive authority but deep understanding of their specific challenges and clear vision for solutions. The market announcement is prepared for 7 a.m. tomorrow, James Patterson informed her as they reviewed final preparations. Financial analysts have been briefed confidentially, and early feedback suggests they view Horizon's investment as a positive development, especially given your history with the company. And our largest clients? Vivian asked, focusing on a critical vulnerability during any leadership transition. The account teams are making personal calls to the top 20 clients this evening, following the script you provided. So far, the responses have been cautiously positive. Several have actually expressed relief that the Vertex merger isn't proceeding. Vivian nodded, checking another item off her mental list. And the employee communication? Company-wide email goes out at 6 a.m., followed by department meetings at 9. The all-hands virtual meeting is scheduled for 11 as you requested. Every detail had been anticipated, every potential point of resistance identified and addressed. This wasn't improvisation. It was the execution of a strategy Vivian had been refining for months, built on her intimate knowledge of Meridian's operations and culture. At 8 p.m., as the Meridian offices gradually emptied, Vivian finally made her way to what had once been her office, then Alexander's, and was now hers again. The space had already been partially transformed, Alexander's personal items removed, the furniture rearranged to its original configuration from her previous tenure. Diane had left a small bouquet of fresh flowers on the desk with a simple note. "Welcome back." The gesture, small but meaningful, was the first moment of the day that threatened Vivian's carefully maintained composure. She sat at the desk, running her hands along its familiar surface, allowing herself a brief moment to absorb the magnitude of what she had accomplished. 2 years ago, she had left this building carrying a box of personal belongings, her professional identity shattered by Alexander's betrayal. Now, she had returned not just to her former position, but to something greater, complete leadership of the company she had helped create, with the authority to implement her vision without compromise. The moment of reflection was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Eleanor Blackwell entered, taking in the scene with a knowing smile. "Congratulations, CEO Chen," Eleanor said, settling into one of the visitor chairs. "You've executed flawlessly so far." "The real work is just beginning," Vivian replied, already refocusing on the challenges ahead. The market announcement tomorrow is critical, but it's the execution over the next quarter that will determine whether we successfully stabilize Meridian. Eleanor studied her with the shrewd assessment that had made her one of Seattle's most successful venture capitalists. "I've backed dozens of CEOs over the years, but I've rarely seen someone so thoroughly prepared for a leadership transition. You've anticipated every contingency, prepared for every reaction. I've had 2 years to plan," Vivian acknowledged, "and intimate knowledge of both the company and its former CEO. Speaking of whom," Eleanor ventured, "any word on Alexander's next moves?" "He's bound by the same non-compete restrictions he once imposed on me," Vivian replied. "Professionally, his options are limited in the immediate term. His reputation in the industry will suffer from Meridian's financial situation and the failed Vertex merger." The symmetry wasn't lost on either. Woman, Alexander now facing the same professional constraints he had once used to sideline Vivian. "And Natalie?" Eleanor asked. She's requested time to consider the Portland offer, Vivian said. I expect she'll decline, but the offer was made in good faith. Her skills are valuable, even if her judgment in personal relationships is questionable. Eleanor laughed, a rare break in her typically composed demeanor. You're handling this with remarkable grace. In your position, many would be tempted toward more direct retribution. Vivian's expression remained thoughtful. Revenge was never the objective. Reclaiming what was taken from me, yes. Proving Alexander wrong about my capabilities, certainly. But Meridian itself was always the ultimate goal, ensuring the company we built survives and thrives. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message, the final confirmation from the legal team that all documents were in order for tomorrow's announcement. Another item checked off her meticulously prepared list. I should go, Eleanor said, rising. You have a momentous day ahead. The investment committee is extremely pleased with how you've managed the transition thus far. Horizon Capital's reputation will be significantly enhanced by this deal, assuming the market responds as we anticipate. After Eleanor departed, Vivian continued working well into the night, reviewing client data, refining her presentation for the all-hands meeting, and preparing responses for the inevitable media inquiries that would follow tomorrow's announcement. Midnight, she finally allowed herself to leave the office, the building now quiet except for the security team. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, Vivian reflected on the contrast with her last departure from this building 2 years ago. The difference between leaving in defeat and departing as the leader who would return tomorrow to chart a new course. Outside, Seattle's night sky was clear, the city lights reflecting off Puget Sound in the distance. Vivian paused on the sidewalk, looking up at Meridian's headquarters, the illuminated floors marking where teams were still working, the darkened windows of Alexander's now empty office. The personal satisfaction she felt was undeniable, but it was secondary to a deeper sense of professional vindication. The past 24 hours had demonstrated not just that Vivian could reclaim her position at Meridian, but that she was unquestionably the right person to lead the company through its current challenges. Her competence hadn't been just asserted. It had been proven through detailed financial analysis, strategic clarity, and operational precision. The executive team had seen it. The board had recognized it. Tomorrow, the market and Meridian's employees would witness it as well. As Vivian drove home, her mind was already mapping out the critical path for the weeks ahead. The immediate crisis had been addressed through Horizon's investment, but sustainable recovery would require fundamental changes to Meridian's operations, culture, and growth strategy. Changes that only someone with Vivian's unique perspective could implement effectively. In the quiet of her car, with Seattle's skyline fading in the rearview mirror, Vivian allowed herself a moment of reflection on the journey that had brought her to this point. The devastation of Alexander's betrayal had indeed been the catalyst for her transformation, but it was her own resilience, strategic thinking, and professional growth that had made this outcome possible. Alexander had once told her she lacked the ruthlessness necessary for business success. What he had failed to recognize was that true leadership wasn't about ruthlessness, but about persistence, vision, and the capacity to build rather than simply acquire. These were the qualities Vivian had demonstrated not just in reclaiming her position at Meridian, but in how she planned to save the company from the very vulnerabilities Alexander's leadership had created. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: skeptical analysts to convince, nervous employees to reassure, strategic changes to implement. But tonight, as CEO Vivian Chen prepared for her first official day leading Meridian Enterprises, she did so with the absolute confidence of someone who had proven not just that she could survive betrayal, but that she could transform it into the foundation for her greatest professional triumph. The announcement of Vivian Chen's return to Meridian Enterprises as CEO created waves that extended far beyond the company's Seattle headquarters. By mid-morning on her first official day, the story had been picked up by major business publications, technology blogs, and local news outlets across the country. Meridian co-founder returns as CEO following failed merger attempt, read the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Tech's most dramatic comeback. Vivian Chen reclaims company after ex-husband's ouster, proclaimed TechCrunch, taking a more personal angle. The Seattle Business Chronicle was even more direct. Meridian's prodigal founder returns to save company from ex-husband's missteps. Meridian's stock, which had been in steady decline for months, jumped 31% in the first hour of trading following the announcement. Financial analysts who had previously expressed concerns about the company's direction now cautiously upgraded their ratings, citing experienced leadership and strategic realignment as positive indicators. Inside Meridian's headquarters, the ripple effects of the leadership change manifested in more personal ways. Employees gathered in small groups, discussing the dramatic developments with a mixture of shock, excitement, and in some cases, concern about what the change might mean for their own positions. "I was here when she left 2 years ago," a veteran developer explained to newer colleagues in the break room. "It was awful. She built half our core systems, and suddenly she was gone with no explanation. Alexander changed everything after that." "Is it true they were married?" asked a young UX designer who had joined during Alexander's tenure. "Married and co-founders," confirmed a project manager. "They built Meridian together from nothing. Then he left her for Natalie and pushed her out of the company." "And now she's back as his boss," the designer marveled. "That's some serious karma." Similar conversations echoed throughout the building as employees processed the implications of this corporate and personal drama. For many who had worked under Alexander's increasingly erratic leadership, Vivian's return represented hope for stability and a return to the company's original values. For others, particularly those hired during Alexander's sole leadership, it created uncertainty about their future in a reorganized Meridian. The all-hands meeting at 11 a.m. did much to address these concerns. Vivian stood on the auditorium stage, facing nearly 800 employees in person and virtually, her composure and clarity providing a stark contrast to Alexander's recent communications, which had grown increasingly defensive as Meridian's challenges mounted. "Many of you know me," she began, "though many others have joined Meridian since my departure 2 years ago. To both groups, I want to emphasize a single point. Today marks not just a change in leadership, but a recommitment to the foundational principles that made Meridian successful in the first place: technical excellence, financial sustainability, and a corporate culture that values both innovation and pragmatism." For the next 30 minutes, Vivian outlined her vision for Meridian's future, acknowledging the company's current challenges while presenting a clear path forward. She was transparent about the necessary changes ahead, including the termination of the Vertex merger and a comprehensive review of recent acquisitions, while reassuring employees that these changes were aimed at strengthening Meridian, not dismantling it. "I've spent the past 2 years observing this industry from a different perspective," she explained. "That perspective, combined with my historical knowledge of Meridian's operations, gives me confidence that we can address our current challenges and emerge stronger for having faced them." The employee response was overwhelmingly positive, with spontaneous applause interrupting her several times. The chat function in the virtual broadcast scrolled with messages of support and questions about specific initiatives, many expressing relief at the change in direction. By afternoon, the ripple effects had extended to Meridian's client base. Account managers reported enthusiastic responses from customers who had grown concerned about service quality and product development under Alexander's leadership. Westfield Financial just called to reinstate their enterprise contract, reported Samantha Okafor, head of client services, during the afternoon executive briefing. They specifically cited the leadership change as the deciding factor. 3 other major accounts that were on the fence have requested meetings with Vivian directly. The positive momentum continued throughout the day, but not all ripples were favorable. Shortly after markets closed, Vivian received word that Natalie Barnes had declined the Portland position and instead accepted a role at Vertex Solutions, the very company whose merger with Meridian had recently failed. "That's concerning," James Patterson observed when Vivian shared this development during their end-of-day meeting. "She knows a lot about our internal operations, client relationships, and strategic plans." "She does," Vivian agreed. "But most of her knowledge pertains to Alexander's strategy, which we're already moving away from. Still, legal should prepare for potential confidentiality concerns." More concerning was the news that arrived via Meridian's legal team late that evening. Alexander had retained Martin Coleman, a high-profile attorney known for aggressive wrongful termination lawsuits. The implied threat was clear. Alexander was not accepting his removal gracefully. "Let him try," Vivian said when informed of this development. "The board's decision is well documented and entirely justified given Meridian's performance under his leadership. His own financial disclosures to the board will be his undoing if he pursues this." The external ripples continued to spread throughout the week following Vivian's return. Industry blogs speculated about the personal drama behind the corporate shakeup. Financial analysts published detailed assessments of Meridian's prospects under new leadership. Competitors reached out to key Meridian clients, hoping to capitalize on the transition period. More unexpected were the ripples within Seattle's tech community, particularly among women in leadership positions. 3 days after the announcement, Vivian received an invitation to speak at an upcoming Women in Tech conference, the note including a personal message from the organizer. "Your return to Meridian sends a powerful message about resilience and second acts in this industry. We'd be honored to have you share your journey." Similar invitations followed: podcast interviews, panel discussions, keynote opportunities, all focused on Vivian's remarkable professional resurrection. While flattered by the attention, she declined most requests, focusing instead on Meridian's immediate needs. "I'll have time for speaking engagements after we've stabilized the company," she explained to Eleanor during their weekly check-in. "Right now, my priority is ensuring that Meridian's recovery is as dramatic as its recent troubles." 1 week into Vivian's tenure as CEO, the most significant ripple effect became apparent in Meridian's internal operations. The atmosphere throughout the company had transformed, tension replaced by tentative optimism, departmental silos giving way to collaborative problem-solving, defensive posturing yielding to transparent assessment of challenges. "It's like someone opened all the windows in a stuffy room," observed David Chen, a product director who had worked at Meridian since its early days. "People are talking to each other again, sharing ideas instead of hoarding information for political advantage. It's how things used to be before." He trailed off, but Vivian understood the unspoken reference to Alexander's leadership style, which had increasingly fostered competition rather than collaboration among teams. The ripple effects extended beyond Meridian to Vivian's personal life as well. Friends who had supported her through the devastating period following Alexander's betrayal now celebrated her triumphant return. Family members who had worried about her during those dark days expressed pride in her resilience. "Mom would have loved to see this," Vivian's brother Michael told her during a rare dinner together, referencing their mother who had passed away the previous year. Her daughter running the company she helped build, proving all the doubters wrong. "She always said you were the strongest of all of us." The observation touched Vivian deeply. Her mother had been her most steadfast supporter during the aftermath of Alexander's betrayal, never doubting that Vivian would find her way forward. That she hadn't lived to see this vindication was perhaps the only bittersweet note in Vivian's otherwise complete triumph. 2 weeks into her leadership, Vivian received an unexpected communication that represented perhaps the most surprising ripple effect of all. An email from Brandon Torres, CEO of Vertex Solutions, the company whose merger with Meridian had collapsed, catalyzing the chain of events that led to Alexander's removal. "I understand Natalie Barnes has joined your team. Vivian noted during the video call that followed Torres's email. An interesting choice, given her history with Meridian. Torres smiled diplomatically. Ms. Barnes brings valuable insights about enterprise client needs, but that's not why I wanted to speak with you. He explained that with Alexander's departure, Vertex was interested in exploring a different type of relationship with Meridian, not a merger, but a strategic partnership, focused on complementary product offerings. The merger Alexander proposed never made sense, Torres admitted. It was driven by ego rather than sound business strategy. But there are legitimate synergies between our companies that could benefit both, if approached differently. The conversation revealed yet another dimension of Alexander's failed leadership. His aggressive acquisition strategy had alienated potential partners who might otherwise have been valuable allies. Vivian promised to consider Torres's proposal once Meridian's immediate stabilization was complete. Another potential positive outcome arising from the leadership change. Perhaps the most profound ripple effect, however, was one that few outside Vivian's inner circle ever witnessed. Late one evening, 3 weeks after taking the helm at Meridian, Vivian sat alone in her office, reviewing the latest financial projections. The immediate crisis had been averted through Horizon's investment, and the company was showing early signs of recovery under her leadership. Alexander nodded, a muscle working in his jaw as he gathered his thoughts. I've also dissolved my relationship with Natalie, he added, the personal revelation unexpected in this setting. It turns out our compatibility was largely situational. Vivian absorbed this information without visible reaction, though she couldn't help wondering if Natalie's decision to join Vertex had precipitated this development, or vice versa. Either way, it represented another unraveling of the life Alexander had chosen over their marriage. I'm telling you this not to seek sympathy, Alexander continued, but because I owe you the truth, at minimum. The choices I made, personally and professionally, have had consequences I didn't anticipate. The understatement was almost laughable. His decision to leave Vivian for Natalie and push her out of Meridian had set in motion the very sequence of events that led to his current predicament. Professionally sidelined, personally isolated, and sitting in what had once been his office. As a visitor requiring security escort. What is it you want, Alexander? Vivian asked, cutting through the carefully constructed preamble to the heart of the matter. He met her gaze directly for the first time since entering the office. I want to understand how you did it, he said, a hint of his former intensity, breaking through. How you went from, he gestured vaguely, where you were 2 years ago to this, to taking back Meridian from under me, to becoming CEO of a successful investment firm, to completely reinventing yourself professionally while I was still dismissing you as a non-factor. The question was remarkable in its honesty. Alexander Reed, who had never acknowledged weaknesses or sought guidance from others, was essentially asking Vivian to explain how she had outmaneuvered him so completely. Vivian considered her response carefully. Part of her wanted to savor this moment of validation, to detail exactly how she had recognized his strategic blind spots and positioned herself to capitalize on them. But something in his expression, a genuine bewilderment that bordered on vulnerability, made her choose a different approach. I had no choice but to reinvent myself, she said finally. You took everything that defined me professionally, my role at Meridian, my connection to the company we built together, my identity in the industry. What remained was just me, my skills, my knowledge, my capacity to begin again. She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the Seattle skyline before continuing. When you have nothing left to lose, you gain a certain clarity. Every decision I made after leaving Meridian was focused on creating something new rather than reclaiming something lost. Horizon Capital wasn't built as a vehicle for revenge. It was built because I recognized an opportunity in the market for the specific expertise I could provide. Alexander listened intently, his expression suggesting he was genuinely trying to understand. And acquiring Meridian? That wasn't about revenge? Vivian turned back to face him. Meridian was a distressed asset with strong fundamentals being mismanaged toward insolvency. It was exactly the type of opportunity Horizon was, created to identify and address. That I had personal history with the company made the analysis more accurate, not less valid. She returned to her seat, meeting his gaze directly. Would another investor have stepped in if Horizon hadn't? Possibly. Would they have understood Meridian's potential as thoroughly as I did? Unlikely. My history with this company was a competitive advantage in recognizing both its vulnerabilities and its unrealized value. Alexander absorbed this, his expression a complex mixture of respect and residual defensiveness. You make it sound inevitable, as if I was destined to fail and you to succeed. Not destined, Vivian corrected, but predictable, given our respective approaches. You pursued growth at any cost, leveraging the company beyond sustainable levels, to fuel acquisition after acquisition. I advocated for strategic growth balanced with operational excellence. The market ultimately confirmed which approach was sound. The assessment was clinical rather than accusatory, but Alexander flinched, slightly nonetheless. The board supported my strategy, he noted, a final attempt at justification. The board wasn't provided with complete information, Vivian countered. The financial reports they received obscured the true extent of Meridian's leverage and the underperformance of acquired companies. That reality would have emerged eventually, with or without my involvement. Alexander fell silent, seemingly processing her words. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from defensive to reflective. We built something remarkable together, he said quietly. Before everything changed. Meridian was the best of both of us. Your technical vision and operational discipline combined with my market instincts and client relationships. The acknowledgement of their former complementary partnership, something Alexander had systematically erased from Meridian's narrative after her departure, caught Vivian by surprise. Yes, we did, she agreed, a hint of the old connection briefly resurfacing between them. And I destroyed it, Alexander continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. Not just our marriage, but the partnership that made Meridian successful. I convinced myself that I was the visionary, that your caution was holding the company back, that I could replicate our success without your counterbalance. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Vivian remembered from their years together. I was wrong, catastrophically wrong, and not just about Meridian, about you. The admission hung in the air between them, its significance extending beyond business strategy to the personal betrayal that had catalyzed everything that followed. Why are you telling me this? Vivian asked, genuinely curious about his motivation for this unexpected moment of accountability. Alexander seemed to consider the question carefully before responding. Because I need to say it out loud, to you specifically. Because acknowledging the magnitude of my miscalculation is the first step toward whatever comes next for me professionally. And because, he hesitated briefly, because you deserve to hear it after everything. Vivian studied him, trying to discern whether this apparent contrition was genuine or merely a tactical maneuver. The Alexander she had married had been capable of remarkable charm when it served his purposes. But the man before her now seemed stripped of those polished defenses, revealing something more authentic beneath. What has come next for you? She asked. He shrugged slightly, the gesture uncharacteristically uncertain for someone who had always projected absolute confidence about his future. I don't know. The non-compete limits my options in the immediate term. My reputation in the industry has suffered. Several board positions I held have been quietly terminated. The parallel to Vivian's own situation 2 years earlier was striking. The professional isolation, the uncertain future, the painful reassessment of capabilities and options. Alexander was experiencing his own version of the devastation he had once inflicted on her. "It isn't easy starting over," Vivian observed, neither gloating nor sympathetic, simply stating a truth they now both understood. "No," Alexander agreed, "but you managed it. Rather spectacularly, in fact." A silence fell between them. Not the tense, angry silence of their boardroom confrontation, but something more contemplative, as two people who had once shared everything now found themselves on opposite sides of a chasm largely of one person's creation. "I should go," Alexander said finally, rising from his chair. "Thank you for seeing me. I know you had no obligation to do so." Vivian stood as well, maintaining the professional distance that now defined their relationship. "What did you hope to gain from this conversation, Alexander?" "Really?" He paused at the door, considering her question with unexpected thoughtfulness. "Closure, perhaps. Understanding. Or maybe just the chance to look you in the eye and acknowledge that you proved me wrong in every possible way." It was, perhaps, the most honest thing he had said to her in years, an unvarnished recognition of how completely his assessment of her had been proven wrong. Not just her business acumen, which he had dismissed, but her resilience, strategic thinking, and capacity for transformation. "I appreciate your candor," Vivian replied after a moment. "It's something that was often missing in our later years together." Alexander nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "For what it's worth, I'm not contesting the divorce settlement either. My attorney advised fighting for a larger share given Meridian's increased valuation under your leadership, but that seemed—" He searched for the right word. "Inappropriate, given the circumstances." "Thank you for that," Vivian said, genuine appreciation in her voice for this unexpected reasonableness. Alexander lingered at the threshold, seemingly reluctant to end the conversation despite having said what he came to say. "The industry gossip says you're implementing a complete restructuring of Meridian's acquisition strategy and reversing most of my major initiatives." "Not all," Vivian corrected. "But yes, we're pivoting toward sustainable growth rather than expansion at any cost. The market has responded favorably." "I've noticed," he said wryly. "My remaining Meridian shares are finally worth something again." The acknowledgement of her success in stabilizing the company he had nearly driven to failure was clearly difficult for him, but Vivian recognized the effort it represented, an admission that her approach had been right all along. "I should let you get back to your day," Alexander said, straightening his shoulders slightly, a gesture Vivian recognized as his attempt to reclaim some dignity. "Thank you again for seeing me." As he turned to leave, Vivian found herself calling after him. "Alexander," he paused, looking back with a question in his eyes. "The non-compete expires in 17 months, she said. You're still a capable executive despite recent missteps. There will be opportunities when that restriction lifts." The comment wasn't quite forgiveness, nor was it precisely kindness. It was professional acknowledgement from one business leader to another, recognition that careers in their industry were rarely defined by single failures, no matter how spectacular. Alexander seemed to understand the nature of this unexpected olive branch. "Perhaps," he said, "though I suspect I have some significant reassessment to do before then." "That," Vivian replied with the hint of a smile, "is something I understand completely." As Alexander was escorted from the executive floor by security, Vivian returned to her desk, the encounter having affected her more than she had anticipated. There was no satisfaction in seeing him diminished, no vindication in his acknowledgement of her superior judgment. What she felt instead was a complex mixture of closure and recognition. Two people who had once shared everything, now acknowledging the truth of their separate paths and the consequences of choices made. Her phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. "Board meeting prep at 2? New acquisition target to discuss." The reminder pulled Vivian firmly back to the present and the future she was building. Alexander Reed was now part of Meridian's past, A significant chapter, certainly, but no longer the determining factor in its trajectory. That responsibility now rested with Vivian, and she intended to ensure that the company's second act would be even more impressive than its first. As she gathered her materials for the upcoming board meeting, Vivian reflected on the symmetry of these full-circle moments, sitting in the office that had once been theirs, then his, and now decisively hers. Discussing strategy with a board that had once dismissed her judgment and now deferred to it. Building a future for Meridian based on the vision Alexander had rejected. The confrontation she had just navigated represented not just the closing of one chapter, but the confident beginning of another, one in which Vivian Chen would lead Meridian Enterprises forward, unburdened by the ghosts of betrayal and focused entirely on the substantial opportunities that lay ahead. 3 months into Vivian's leadership, Meridian Enterprises had undergone a profound metamorphosis. The transformation extended far beyond financial statements and organizational charts. It permeated the physical environment, corporate culture, and even the energy that greeted visitors when they stepped off the elevator on the executive floor. The most visible changes began with the headquarters itself. Under Alexander's leadership, Meridian's office space had gradually evolved to reflect his personal aesthetic, imposing, status-oriented, and designed to intimidate rather than inspire. Dark woods, heavy furniture, closed doors, and hierarchical seating arrangements had signaled a top-down culture where information flowed in carefully controlled channels. Vivian's first major facilities project had been to literally open up these spaces, removing physical barriers that reinforce separation between departments and leadership levels. The executive floor, once a fortress of closed doors and administrative gatekeepers, was reconfigured with glass partitions and collaborative workspaces. Vivian's own office remained, but with transparent walls and a policy that prioritized accessibility over executive isolation. The environmental changes aren't just cosmetic, Vivian explained to the executive team as construction crews transformed the space around them. Physical barriers reinforce psychological ones. How we arrange our workspace directly influences how we think about collaboration, information sharing, and organizational hierarchy. The transformation extended to the technology development floors as well. The rigid cubicle structure that Alexander had gradually imposed was replaced with a more flexible arrangement of team pods, quiet focus areas, and communal spaces designed to facilitate both concentration and collaboration as needed. "I can't believe the difference," remarked Raj Patel, a senior developer who had been with Meridian since before Vivian's departure. Under Alexander, it felt like we were working in isolation chambers. Ideas stayed trapped in individual departments. Now it feels like ideas can breathe and evolve across boundaries again. The physical redesign was backed by substantial technology upgrades, another area that had stagnated under Alexander's leadership, as resources were diverted to acquisitions rather than infrastructure. Vivian authorized a comprehensive overhaul of Meridian's internal systems, prioritizing tools that facilitated collaboration, transparent project tracking, and cross-functional communication. But perhaps the most profound environmental transformation was in the intangible atmosphere that permeated Meridian's offices, the nervous tension that had characterized Alexander's final year, when employees carefully guarded information, avoided challenging leadership directives, and focused on political survival rather than innovation, had dissipated remarkably quickly. In its place emerged a renewed energy, a sense of possibility that longtime employees recognized from Meridian's early days when Vivian and Alexander had led as true partners. The difference was palpable to anyone who had experienced both eras. "It's like we can breathe again," observed Diane Matthews during a check-in with Vivian. "People are excited to come to work. They're volunteering ideas in meetings instead of waiting to be called on. They're collaborating across departments without being forced to." This cultural shift wasn't accidental. Vivian had deliberately modeled the behaviors she wanted to see throughout the organization. asking questions rather than issuing directives, acknowledging uncertainty where it existed rather than projecting false confidence, and explicitly valuing diverse perspectives in decision-making processes. The transformation extended to Meridian's meeting culture as well. The lengthy, presentation-heavy sessions that had become standard under Alexander's leadership were replaced by focused discussions with clear objectives and broad participation. Status meetings were conducted via collaborative documents rather than time-consuming in-person updates. And most significantly, dissenting opinions were not merely tolerated, but actively encouraged. "I need people who will tell me when I'm wrong," Vivian explained during an all-hands gathering 2 months into her tenure. "The greatest risk to any organization is leadership that hears only what it wants to hear. That's how we ended up with the Vertex merger disaster." This explicit commitment to intellectual honesty resonated throughout Meridian, particularly with employees who had witnessed Alexander's increasing intolerance for perspectives that challenged his vision. The result was the environmental transformation, not just in physical space, but in the conversational space where ideas were exchanged and decisions made. The effects of these changes became evident in unexpected ways. Employee sick days decreased by 22% compared to the same quarter the previous year. Applications for internal transfers, often an indicator of departmental dysfunction, dropped by 68%. And perhaps most tellingly, Meridian's Glassdoor ratings improved from 2.8 to a stellar 4.6 in just 3 months, with anonymous reviews specifically, citing the improved work environment and leadership transparency. Even Meridian's client interactions reflected this environmental transformation. The sleek, intimidation-focused meeting rooms that Alexander had designed to project power during negotiations were reconfigured to facilitate genuine partnership discussions. The change was subtle but significant, replacing the massive boardroom table with modular furniture that could be arranged based on the nature of the conversation, adding interactive technology that enabled real-time collaboration, ensuring equal sightlines and comfortable seating for all participants rather than elevated positions for Meridian representatives. "Our physical environment should reflect our business philosophy," Vivian explained to the sales team during training on the new approach. "We're not here to overpower clients, but to solve problems with them. Our spaces should facilitate that partnership rather than undermine it." The client response was overwhelmingly positive. Several major accounts that had been considering moving to competitors specifically cited the shift in Meridian's approach as a factor in their decision to renew contracts. "It's not just that the software is better," explained the CTO of Westfield Financial during a renewal discussion. "It's that working with Meridian feels different now. We're treated like partners rather than targets. Our feedback is actually incorporated rather than dismissed." 6 weeks into these transformations, Vivian received an unexpected email from Lisa Kwan, the former VP of Product Development, who had warned her about Alexander's plans 2 years earlier. Lisa had left Meridian during Alexander's tenure, joining a smaller competitor where she had subsequently been promoted to Chief Product Officer. "I visited Meridian yesterday for a potential partnership discussion," Lisa wrote. "I almost didn't recognize the place. Not just the physical changes, but the energy of the people. Whatever you're doing, it's working. For the first time in years, I felt a twinge of regret about leaving." The message reinforced what Vivian was increasingly recognizing. The environmental transformation of Meridian under her leadership wasn't just about undoing Alexander's mistakes or returning to some earlier version of the company. It was about creating something new, a synthesis that combined the innovative spirit of Meridian's early days with the strategic clarity and operational discipline Vivian had developed during her time building Horizon Capital. The transformation extended to Meridian's branding and external presence as well. The aggressive, competition-focused messaging that had characterized Alexander's marketing approach was replaced by communication that emphasized problem-solving, client success, and sustainable innovation. The corporate website was redesigned to highlight client case studies rather than Meridian's size or market position. Press releases focused on product improvements and client outcomes rather than acquisitions and growth metrics. "We're shifting the narrative," Vivian explained to the marketing team. "Meridian isn't about dominating markets. It's about solving real problems with sustainable technology solutions. That's the company we originally built, and it's the company we're becoming again, just with greater scale and capability." This realignment of Meridian's external identity with its internal transformation created a powerful coherence that resonated with employees, clients, and industry observers alike. The company wasn't just saying it had changed, it was demonstrating that change in every aspect of its operations and interactions. 3 months after taking control of Meridian, Vivian stood in the center of the transformed executive floor, observing the activity around her. Engineers collaborated with marketing specialists at a shared workspace that had once been Alexander's private conference room. Account managers and developers huddled around a prototype display, debating user experience, improvements with animated enthusiasm. Through glass partitions, she could see her executive team engaged in spontaneous problem-solving rather than formal presentations. The space hummed with productive energy, so different from the tense silence that had characterized these same floors in the final months of Alexander's leadership. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still pockets of resistance, departments that clung to old ways of working, individuals who remained skeptical about the new direction. But the momentum was undeniable, building with each week as positive results reinforced the wisdom of the changes. Eleanor Blackwell joined Vivian for their weekly walkthrough of the headquarters, her shrewd investor's eye taking in the transformed environment. "You've essentially rebuilt the company's DNA in a single quarter," she observed. "That's extraordinarily difficult to achieve, particularly in an organization of this size." "The foundations were always there," Vivian replied. "Meridian's original culture was collaborative and innovation-focused. I'm not creating something new so much as removing the barriers that prevented that culture from thriving." They paused at the windows overlooking Seattle, the same view that had once framed Alexander's power displays during client meetings, now serving as a shared space where employees gathered for informal discussions and creative thinking. Still, Eleanor persisted. "The speed of the transformation is remarkable. I've invested in dozens of turnaround situations, and they typically take much longer to show meaningful cultural change." Vivian considered this assessment, recognizing its accuracy. "I think it's because I'm not an outside CEO brought in to fix a troubled company. I'm a founder returning to the organization I helped create. There was a reservoir of institutional memory, people who remembered what Meridian was before Alexander's later approach took hold. They weren't resisting change so much as welcoming a return to core values they already shared." This insight captured the essence of Meridian's environmental transformation under Vivian's leadership. Not a revolution imposed from above, but a reconnection with founding principles that had been obscured but never fully erased during Alexander's tenure. The physical changes to workspace, the technological upgrades, the shifts in meeting culture and decision-making processes all were expressions of this fundamental realignment with Meridian's original DNA. As Vivian and Eleanor continued their tour of the transformed headquarters, they passed the office that had once been Alexander's domain, now a collaborative innovation lab where cross-functional teams tackled the company's most challenging problems. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on either woman. The space once reserved for individual power was now dedicated to collective intelligence. The environmental transformation of Meridian Enterprises under Vivian's leadership had indeed been remarkably swift and comprehensive. But its true significance lay not in the changed physical spaces or reorganized departments, but in how these environmental shifts enabled and reinforced a deeper transformation in how Meridian functioned, innovated, and engaged with both employees and clients. This was no mere cosmetic renovation. but a fundamental reimagining of what Meridian could be. A vision that Vivian had carried with her through the darkest days after Alexander's betrayal, and was now bringing to life with the full resources and authority of her position as CEO. 6 months after Vivian Chen assumed leadership of Meridian Enterprises, the quarterly earnings call provided undeniable evidence of the company's remarkable transformation. Financial analysts who had been skeptical about yet another leadership change now found themselves confronted with metrics that told a compelling story of recovery and renewed growth. Meridian has achieved what few companies manage following a near crisis, noted Sarah Mendelson, senior technology analyst at Goldman Sachs, in her post-earnings report. Not merely stabilization, but a complete strategic realignment that has positioned them for sustainable growth. CEO Vivian Chen has effectively salvaged a company that was rapidly approaching a liquidity crisis under previous leadership. The numbers validated this assessment. Revenue had stabilized and begun growing again, with a 12% increase quarter over quarter. Operating margins had improved from a concerning 8% to a healthy 22% through strategic cost management and operational efficiencies. Most impressively, client retention had rebounded from 74% to 91%, a dramatic reversal of the downward trend that had characterized Alexander's final year. Our focus has been on fundamentals, Vivian explained during the earnings call, her confidence evident as she walked analysts through the results. Rather than pursuing growth at any cost, we've prioritized client satisfaction, product excellence, and strategic partnership development. The financial results reflect the wisdom of this balanced approach. The market responded enthusiastically, with Meridian's stock climbing 17% in the day following the earnings announcement. Financial news channels that had previously run segments questioning Meridian's viability now featured analysts praising its dramatic turnaround. Chen has essentially executed a masterclass in corporate recovery, observed Michael Fierro on CNBC's Closing Bell. She inherited a company with dangerous leverage levels, declining client satisfaction, and a failed merger attempt. 6 months later, Meridian is once again being viewed as a potential industry leader rather than an acquisition target. This external validation was gratifying, but for Vivian, the most meaningful evidence of success came from within Meridian itself. Employee surveys revealed a transformation in morale and engagement that mirrored the financial improvements. Overall, employee satisfaction had increased from 62% to 87%. Reported incidents of workplace stress had decreased by 41%, and perhaps most tellingly, voluntary departures had dropped by 68% compared to the same period the previous year. People aren't just staying because the company is stable again, observed Samantha Okafor, the newly promoted Chief People Officer. They're staying because they believe in the direction we're heading. They can see the connection between their work and Meridian's success in a way that had become obscured. This renewed sense of purpose was evident in the product development teams as well. Under Alexander's leadership, innovation had increasingly focused on features that could be marketed for competitive advantage rather than solving genuine client problems. As a result, Meridian's once legendary product reputation had gradually eroded, with clients increasingly viewing their offerings as flashy but superficial. Vivian's reorientation of the product strategy toward substantive improvement was already yielding results. The latest release of Meridian's flagship enterprise management platform had received the highest client satisfaction ratings in 3 years. Industry reviewers noted the software's improved performance, intuitive design, and thoughtful integration of features that addressed long-standing client pain points. "It's like they're actually listening to us again," remarked the CIO of Barton Healthcare, a major Meridian client who had been considering switching providers before Vivian's return. The latest update addressed issues we've been raising for years that were repeatedly deprioritized under the previous leadership. Perhaps the most convincing evidence of Meridian's successful transformation came in the form of client acquisition and retention metrics. Under Alexander's leadership, The sales team had been incentivized to focus almost exclusively on new client acquisition, often at the expense of maintaining relationships with existing clients. The result had been an expensive churn cycle, with new clients being signed at premium rates, while established customers quietly departed. Vivian had restructured both the sales strategy and compensation model to prioritize long-term client partnerships over short-term acquisition metrics. The results were remarkable. Not only had client retention improved dramatically, but the cost of sales had decreased by 31% as more business came through referrals and expanded engagements with existing clients. We're no longer selling to clients. We're solving problems with them, explained Marcus Rodriguez, the newly appointed Chief Revenue Officer who had previously worked with Vivian during Meridian's early days. That fundamental shift in approach has transformed how our clients view their relationship with Meridian, from vendor to partner. This transformation was perhaps best illustrated by the case of Westfield Financial, which had reduced its Meridian contract by 60% during Alexander's final year and had been on the verge of complete departure. 6 months into Vivian's leadership, Westfield had not only restored its original contract value, but had expanded it by an additional 25%, specifically citing Meridian's renewed focus on client success as the determining factor. The Westfield recovery isn't just about revenue, Vivian noted during the executive team's monthly strategy session. It's validation of our entire approach. When we focus on creating genuine value for clients rather than extracting maximum revenue, we actually achieve better financial outcomes. The evidence of success extended to Meridian's competitive position as well. Under Alexander's leadership, the company had increasingly relied on aggressive pricing and marketing tactics to compete, often making promises that the product couldn't fully deliver. The resulting reputation damage had made it increasingly difficult to win deals against more focused competitors. Vivian's strategic reset had repositioned Meridian in the market, emphasizing areas where the company could genuinely claim competitive advantage while being transparent about limitations. This authentic approach, combined with the substantial product improvements, had resulted in a 23% increase in competitive win rate despite less aggressive pricing. We're winning deals we would have lost 6 months ago, observed Raj Patel during a product strategy meeting. And more importantly, we're winning them for the right reasons, because our solution actually addresses the client's needs better than alternatives, not because we discounted deeper or promised features we haven't built yet. The financial markets had taken notice of these substantive improvements. Meridian's credit rating, which had been downgraded to near-junk status during Alexander's acquisition spree, had been upgraded twice in the past quarter. This improvement in creditworthiness had allowed the company to refinance its remaining debt at significantly more favorable terms, creating additional financial flexibility for strategic investments. The credit rating agencies are recognizing what we've seen internally, noted James Patterson during a board update. Meridian isn't just temporarily patched, it's fundamentally stronger than it was before the crisis. That's reflected in our borrowing costs, our stock price, and our ability to attract strategic partners. Indeed, partnership opportunities that had evaporated during Alexander's tenure were now re-emerging, often initiated by the very companies that had previously distanced themselves from Meridian. 3 major technology providers had approached Vivian about integration initiatives, and 2 potential acquisition targets had indicated preference for Meridian over competing offers, specifically citing the company's leadership and cultural alignment. The industry has a long memory, Eleanor Blackwell observed during their weekly update. Companies remember both how Alexander conducted business and how Meridian operated when you were involved in leadership before. The contrast has created an opportunity to rebuild relationships that many thought were permanently damaged. For Vivian, perhaps the most meaningful evidence of success came during an all-hands meeting marking her 6-month anniversary as CEO. As she concluded her presentation on the company's progress and future direction, something unexpected happened. The assembled employees rose in spontaneous applause, their faces reflecting not just professional appreciation, but genuine emotional connection to the company's revival. Later, as she reviewed the anonymous feedback submitted following the meeting, one comment particularly stood out. 2 years ago, I was updating my resume and planning my exit. Today, I'm proud to tell people I work at Meridian again. Thank you for bringing back the company we believed in. This sentiment was echoed in dozens of similar comments, each reflecting a personal experience of Meridian's transformation under Vivian's leadership. The metrics and market validation were important, certainly, but these human testimonials represented perhaps the most compelling evidence of success: the restoration of pride and purpose within an organization that had lost its way. As Vivian prepared for the upcoming board meeting, she compiled the comprehensive evidence of Meridian's successful transformation: financial metrics showing sustained improvement, client satisfaction scores reaching record levels, employee engagement metrics reflecting renewed purpose and commitment, product reviews highlighting substantive improvements rather than marketing gloss, partnerships and opportunities that had seemed impossible 6 months earlier. The narrative they collectively told was clear and compelling. Meridian Enterprises wasn't merely recovering from near disaster. It was emerging stronger, more focused, and better positioned than it had been. Even before Alexander's missteps, the transformation wasn't just a return to stability, but an evolution towards something more sustainable and valuable than what had existed before. For Vivian personally, this evidence of success carried profound meaning beyond professional validation. Each improved metric, each positive client interaction, each engaged employee represented the vindication of her vision for what Meridian could be, the vision Alexander had dismissed as overly cautious and insufficient for market leadership as ROI. She reviewed the final slides for her board presentation. Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The devastation of Alexander's betrayal, both personal and professional, had forced her to rebuild herself from the ground up. That painful process had ultimately equipped her with exactly the skills, perspective, and resilience needed to rescue and transform the company they had once built together. The evidence of success surrounding her wasn't just proof that she had been right and Alexander wrong, though that validation was certainly present. More importantly, it was confirmation that the values she had always advocated, sustainable growth, authentic client relationships, collaborative innovation, financial discipline, were indeed the foundation for genuine business success. The quarterly numbers told a story of remarkable corporate recovery, but for Vivian Chen, they represented something even more significant: the culmination of a personal and professional journey from betrayed co-founder to triumphant CEO, from discarded partner to visionary leader, whose approach had been unequivocally validated by the very market Alexander had claimed she didn't understand. This, perhaps, was the most meaningful evidence of success. Not that she had proven Alexander wrong, but that she had proven herself right, creating in the process a stronger, more vibrant Meridian than had ever existed before. 1 year to the day, after Vivian Chen assumed leadership of Meridian Enterprises, she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, watching the Seattle sunset paint the skyline in hues of gold and amber. The symbolism of the anniversary wasn't lost on her. One complete cycle from crisis to recovery, from uncertainty to validated success, from professional devastation to triumphant return. The past 12 months had transformed not just Meridian, but Vivian herself. The woman who had entered this building as the new CEO, determined, strategic, and focused on reclaiming what had been taken from her, had evolved into something more complex and perhaps more powerful. The journey had changed, her in ways she was only now beginning to fully understand. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her reflection. Eleanor Blackwell entered, carrying a small gift bag and wearing an unusually warm smile. "I thought the occasion deserved acknowledgement," Eleanor said, placing the bag on Vivian's desk. 1 year of the most remarkable corporate turnaround I've witnessed in 3 decades of investing. Vivian opened the gift to find a beautiful crystal paperweight etched with a simple message: Vision vindicated. The sentiment brought an unexpected lump to her throat. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by the gesture from her typically reserved mentor and investor. "It's been quite a year." "That," Eleanor replied, "is an understatement of spectacular proportions." They settled into the comfortable seating area that had replaced Alexander's imposing conference table, the city lights beginning to twinkle beneath them as darkness fell. Horizon Capital's investment in Meridian has yielded a 218% return in 12 months, Eleanor noted, her investors' precision never far from the surface. "From a purely financial perspective, it's been an unqualified success. But I suspect the metrics that matter most to you are different." Vivian nodded, considering the question. "The financial recovery was necessary, of course. But you're right. That's not how I measure success, at least not primarily." She gestured toward the open office space beyond her glass walls, where even, at this evening hour, teams were engaged in animated collaboration. "I measure it in the restoration of Meridian's culture, in products that genuinely solve client problems, in an organization that functions from authentic values rather than ego or acquisition metrics." "And on a personal level?" Eleanor asked, her gaze shrewd but compassionate. "How do you measure the success of your own journey through all this?" The question struck at something Vivian had been contemplating as the anniversary approached: how to integrate the personal and professional dimensions of her remarkable year. "When Alexander left," she began carefully, "he took everything I thought defined me: my marriage, my role at Meridian, my professional identity. I measured my initial success by what I reclaimed. But somewhere along the way, that changed." Eleanor listened attentively as Vivian continued. "I realized I wasn't actually reclaiming anything. I was creating something new, a different version of Meridian, a different version of myself. Not a restoration, but a reinvention." This insight had been gradually forming throughout the year, crystallizing as Vivian recognized that her leadership of Meridian wasn't simply undoing Alexander's mistakes or returning to some earlier version of the company. It was synthesizing her original vision with everything she'd learned during her time building Horizon Capital, creating something stronger and more sustainable than what had existed before. "The personal vindication of proving Alexander wrong about my capabilities was satisfying," Vivian acknowledged with a smile. "I won't pretend it wasn't, but it was also surprisingly fleeting. What has proven more lasting is the discovery that his betrayal inadvertently led me to capacities and strengths I might never have developed otherwise." Eleanor nodded, understanding evident in her expression. Necessity as the mother of reinvention. "Exactly," Vivian agreed. "If Alexander hadn't pushed me out of Meridian, I never would have built Horizon Capital. I never would have developed the investment expertise that eventually allowed me to recognize Meridian's vulnerability and position myself to step in. The very skills needed to save Meridian were ones I acquired only because I was forced to start over." The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Alexander's attempt to eliminate Vivian professionally had instead catalyzed her evolution into precisely the leader capable of rescuing Meridian from his mismanagement. "There's a certain poetic justice in that," Eleanor observed. "There is," Vivian agreed. "But what I find more meaningful is the integration of those experiences into something constructive. The pain of betrayal transformed into capacity for leadership, the professional setback converted into strategic advantage, the personal loss evolving into independence I might never have claimed otherwise." As they spoke, Vivian's assistant appeared, at the door with a subtle gesture indicating an important call. Eleanor rose to leave, squeezing Vivian's shoulder briefly, a rare physical gesture from the typically reserved investor. "You've done something extraordinary here, Vivian. Not just with Meridian, but with your own story. Not many people manage to transform betrayal into triumph so completely." After Eleanor's departure, Vivian took the call, a major client confirming expansion of their Meridian contract to international offices. Another success, another validation of the company's renewed direction under her leadership. When she hung up, Vivian found herself drawn back to the windows, to the cityscape now fully illuminated against the night sky. 1 year ago, she had stood in this same spot, looking out at these same lights, feeling the weight of responsibility for a company in crisis. She had carried with her then the scars of Alexander's betrayal, the determination to prove him wrong, the fire of reclaiming what had been taken from her. Now those motivations had evolved into something more nuanced and perhaps more powerful. The desire to prove Alexander wrong had been satisfied and then transcended, replaced by a vision that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with what Meridian could become under leadership that valued sustainable growth over ego-driven expansion. Vivian's phone buzzed with a text message from James Patterson. Board review packet looks excellent. Looking forward to celebrating the 1-year milestone tomorrow. You've achieved the impossible. The affirmation brought a smile to Vivian's face, but also a moment of reflection on how her relationship with validation had changed over the past year. Early in her return to Meridian, external confirmation of her success had been crucial, evidence that her judgment had been right, that her capabilities were real, that Alexander's dismissal of her potential had been catastrophically wrong. Now, 12 months later, she found herself less invested in external validation and more centered in her own assessment of what mattered. Meridian was thriving not because it proved Alexander wrong, but because Vivian's leadership approach was fundamentally sound, focused on creating genuine value rather than the appearance of success. This shift from external to internal validation represented perhaps the most significant evolution in Vivian's personal journey. The woman who had once been devastated by Alexander's rejection now stood complete in herself, her worth no longer tethered to his or anyone else's assessment. As she gathered her things to leave for the evening, Vivian noticed a small frame on her desk that hadn't been there earlier, clearly another anniversary gift, this one from her executive team. It contained a simple quote attributed to Roman philosopher Seneca: "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." The sentiment resonated deeply. The difficulties she had faced, Alexander's betrayal, professional exile, the painful rebuilding of her identity, had indeed strengthened not just her mind, but her entire approach to leadership and life. The labor of transformation, both personal and professional, had produced capacities she might never have developed in more comfortable circumstances. Driving home through Seattle's evening traffic, Vivian reflected on the integration of these seemingly contradictory parts of her journey. The devastation that had once felt like an ending had become the catalyst for a new beginning. The betrayal meant to diminish her had instead expanded her capabilities. The professional exile intended to render her irrelevant had created the conditions for her triumphant return. This integration of apparent opposites, pain and growth, setback and opportunity, ending and beginning, had produced not just Vivian's personal transformation, but Meridian's organizational rebirth as well. The company's culture now reflected this same synthesis, combining the innovative spirit of its founding days with the strategic discipline Vivian had developed during her time building Horizon Capital. Arriving at her downtown apartment, Vivian was greeted by a stunning floral arrangement in the foyer, a gift from her brother Michael with a card that read simply, "Mom would be bursting with pride today. So am I." The personal acknowledgement touched her deeply. Throughout the intense focus on Meridian's transformation, Vivian had maintained close connections with the small circle of family and friends who had supported her during her darkest days after Alexander's betrayal. Their presence in her life represented another form of integration, the balance between professional achievement and personal relationships that she had sometimes neglected during Meridian's early years. Later that evening, as Vivian prepared materials for the next day's board meeting commemorating her first year as CEO, she found herself drawn to an article that had appeared in that morning's Seattle Business Chronicle. Meridian's Renaissance: How Vivian Chen Transformed Betrayal into Billion-Dollar Success. The headline made her smile. Journalists did love their dramatic narratives. But as she skimmed the article, she found it captured something essential about her journey. The writer had interviewed several Meridian employees, clients, and industry analysts, weaving together a narrative that extended beyond business metrics to the human dimension of the company's transformation. Chen's leadership represents a new model of corporate resilience, the article concluded. Not the ego-driven, acquisition-obsessed approach that nearly destroyed Meridian, but a balanced vision that values sustainable growth, authentic client relationships, and organizational health. In proving her ex-husband catastrophically wrong about her capabilities, Chen has simultaneously validated a leadership approach that the technology industry desperately needs. The assessment was gratifying, particularly the recognition that what had occurred at Meridian wasn't just a personal vindication, but a validation of an entire leadership philosophy, one that prioritized genuine value creation over the appearance of success, sustainable growth over reactive expansion, and collaborative innovation over top-down control. As midnight approached on this significant anniversary, Vivian allowed herself a final moment of reflection. The journey from devastated ex-wife to triumphant CEO had not been what she would have chosen. The pain of betrayal too acute, the professional setback too severe, the personal loss too profound. Yet standing on the other side of that transformation, she could acknowledge that these very difficulties had forged something extraordinary, both in herself and in the company she now led. The Vivian Chen who had sobbed on her bedroom floor as Alexander packed his suitcase could never have imagined the woman she would become through that crucible. Stronger, certainly, but also more authentic, more purposeful, and paradoxically, more compassionate, even toward Alexander himself. Their final conversation months earlier had revealed a man beginning to recognize the magnitude of his miscalculation, not just in dismissing Vivian's capabilities, but in the fundamental values that had guided his leadership. There had been no satisfaction in witnessing his diminishment, only a quiet acknowledgement that consequences inevitably follow choices. Vivian's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for tomorrow. 1-year anniversary board presentation, 9 a.m. The agenda included her vision for Meridian's next stage of growth, building on the successful foundation established during this transformative year. That future-focused orientation captured perhaps the most significant aspect of Vivian's personal and professional integration. She was no longer defined by her past with Alexander, or even by her triumphant return to Meridian. She had moved beyond reaction to creation, beyond reclamation to innovation, beyond proving Alexander wrong to proving herself right in ways that transcended their shared history. As she finalized her presentation for the board meeting, Vivian included a slide she had deliberated over for days, a simple statement of Meridian's renewed purpose under her leadership. Building technology that serves humanity through sustainable innovation and authentic partnership. The words reflected not just a corporate mission but Vivian's personal integration of all she had experienced. The pain of betrayal transformed into commitment to authenticity. The experience of professional dismissal converted into valuing genuine partnership. The recovery from crisis channeled into dedication to sustainability. Morning found Vivian Chen striding confidently through Meridian's headquarters, greeting employees by name, exchanging brief updates with department heads, her presence exuding the calm authority that had become her leadership signature. The boardroom awaited, its configuration transformed like so much else in the company. No longer designed for power displays but for collaborative decision-making and strategic clarity. As board members gathered, the atmosphere reflected the dramatic shift in Meridian's trajectory over the past 12 months. From crisis to stability, from vulnerability to strength, from uncertainty to validated success. James Patterson, who had witnessed both Vivian's departure and her triumphant return, greeted her with genuine warmth. "1 year ago, we took a chance on your vision for Meridian's recovery," he said quietly. "It might be the best decision this board has ever made." Vivian smiled, acknowledging the compliment while recognizing that taking a chance hadn't quite captured what had occurred. The board hadn't gambled on an unknown quantity. They had recognized in Vivian the leadership qualities Meridian desperately needed, the same qualities Alexander had systematically dismissed and attempted to erase from the company's culture. As she prepared to present her anniversary assessment and future vision to the board, Vivian Chen stood not as Alexander Reed's ex-wife who had improbably reclaimed her position, but as Meridian's CEO who had earned that role through demonstrated capability and validated results. The distinction was subtle but profound. A shift from identity defined by relationship to identity established through independent achievement. "Good morning," Vivian began, her voice confident and clear. 1 year ago, Meridian Enterprises stood at a critical inflection point, facing challenges that threatened its very existence. Today, we gather to celebrate not just recovery, but renaissance, a fundamental reimagining of what this company can be and the value it can create in the world. As she guided the board through Meridian's remarkable transformation, financial, metrics, client success stories, product innovations, cultural evolution, Vivian recognized that she was simultaneously presenting the narrative of her own journey. The company's integration of apparent opposites, innovative spirit with financial discipline, technical excellence with human-centered design, ambitious vision with sustainable execution, mirrored her personal integration of seemingly contradictory experiences. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy her had become the catalyst for her greatest achievements. The professional dismissal meant to render her irrelevant had created the conditions for her most significant contributions. The personal loss that had seemed devastating had ultimately led to a more authentic and powerful sense of self. This integration of past and present, pain and purpose, ending and beginning, represented the true culmination of Vivian Chen's extraordinary journey. Not merely surviving betrayal, but transforming it into the foundation for unprecedented success. Not simply reclaiming what had been taken, but creating something far more valuable in its place. Not just proving Alexander wrong, but validating a vision that transcended their shared history and pointed toward a future limited only by imagination and the courage to pursue it. As Vivian concluded her presentation to enthusiastic board approval, she carried within her the quiet certainty that this anniversary marked not just a milestone in Meridian's recovery, but the completion of a personal transformation more profound than any corporate turnaround. The woman who had once defined herself in relation to Alexander Reed, as wife, as co-founder, as betrayed partner, now stood complete in herself, her identity forged through challenge, her purpose clarified through adversity, her vision validated through results. The journey that had begun with a devastating betrayal had culminated in triumph beyond mere revenge, the creation of a stronger, more authentic self, and a more vibrant, purposeful Meridian than had ever existed before. In the end, Alexander's most significant contribution to Vivian's life hadn't been the company they built together, or even the betrayal that shattered her world, but the opportunity that betrayal inadvertently created for her to discover capabilities, purpose, and strength she might never have claimed otherwise. As board members offered congratulations and shared their perspectives on Meridian's extraordinary year, Vivian felt a deep sense of completion, not of her journey, which would continue to evolve in ways she couldn't yet imagine, but of the chapter that had begun with betrayal and culminated in this moment of integrated triumph. Whatever the future held for Vivian Chen and for Meridian Enterprises, it would be shaped not by reaction to the past, but by vision for the future, not by proving others wrong, but by creating something authentically right. In that realization lay perhaps the most profound evidence of Vivian's transformation. She had moved beyond the need for vindication to the freedom of creation, beyond the shadow of betrayal to the light of possibility, beyond the limitations of what had been to the expansive potential of what could be. And in that integration of her past experiences with her present purpose and future vision, Vivian Chen had achieved something far more significant than reclaiming a company from the man who had betrayed her. She had claimed a self more powerful, more authentic, and more complete than any external circumstance could diminish or define. That, in the end, was the true measure of her success. Not that she owned the company that had fired her ex-husband, but that she had become a woman whose worth was no longer tied to his or anyone else's assessment. In transforming betrayal into triumph, Vivian had discovered that the most important company to reclaim had been herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.